Lớp học chúng ta đã muộn khoảng 5 phút. Tôi xin hôm qua thì đã trao đổi rồi, hôm nay chúng ta sẽ tiếp tục với các cái chủ đề liên quan đến bảo hiểm chăn nuôi và nuôi trồng thủy sản ở Việt Nam. Đặc biệt là anh Autos sẽ trình bày một số các vấn đề liên quan đến cái nền tảng kỹ thuật trong thiết kế, trong vận hành bảo hiểm nông nghiệp và thiết kế các kênh phân phối trong bảo hiểm nông nghiệp. Thì đây là các cái thông tin rất là quý. Chiều hôm nay thì chúng ta sẽ tập trung vào một số các vấn đề nó rộng hơn liên quan đến chính sách, liên quan đến nông dân và liên quan đến bảo hiểm. Và trong chiều hôm nay thì chúng ta sẽ có một cái bài trình bày của chị Emily nữa là giới thiệu về dự án Insure, và nếu như có các cái đề xuất, các cái ý tưởng mà cần các cái dự án, các hỗ trợ từ nước ngoài thì các anh chị có thể đề xuất vào chiều hôm nay. Thì sau đây tôi xin nhường lại lời cho anh Autos sẽ trình bày các cái chủ đề trong buổi sáng ngày hôm nay. Xin cảm ơn Autos và xin cảm ơn các anh các chị rất là nhiều.
Sure, thank you very much. Let me just set up the video. All right. Thank you very much, and welcome back everybody to the second day of this training of trainers on agriculture insurance in Vietnam. So today we have quite a packed agenda, as you just heard. So we, in terms of the specific topics that we'll be covering in the course of the day, if we can move to the next slide. Yeah. Okay, great. So today, basically, we'll be covering these different topics, as you just heard. So we will be, just a second, let me increase the screen. Okay, yeah, so today we will be starting off, the first session is going to be, well, firstly, we have some time if there are any questions or clarifications that you want to seek from yesterday. We can also talk about that briefly today. So as you saw yesterday, we covered some of the important concepts of insurance, some of the key concepts of agriculture insurance. We also talked about some of the key stakeholders and the relevant risks in Vietnam for agriculture, and some of the risk management strategies as well. We then looked at the criteria that we can apply on to assess whether a risk is insurable or not. And especially looking at the frequency of the risk and the severity of the risk and so on. We then looked at the potential benefits of agriculture insurance to various stakeholders, including farmers, government, as well as other stakeholders. And then we started looking at the main product type categories yesterday. So we looked at the categories of indemnity insurance and index insurance. We looked at different categories of index insurance as well. We then talked quite a bit about some of the international experiences from different parts of the world related to the role of the government in supporting agriculture insurance, and also related to specific products and specific topics like premium subsidies, reinsurance, the operational role that government can play, and so on. We also talked about regulations briefly. And then we started looking at the details of the rice insurance product in Vietnam in the last session yesterday. So today we really pick up from there. As you can see in the agenda, we will be discussing some of the key features of the livestock and aquaculture insurance in Vietnam. Then we shall have a very important session on some of the key technical topics related to pricing, use of data, satellite monitoring, product design, and so on. And then we shall also have a brief session on some of the different types of distribution channels, which could help in terms of reaching a large number of farmers. Then in the afternoon, we have a few sessions related to regulations and supporting policies, which my colleague Tin will take us through, as well as the premium subsidies and role of stakeholders in Vietnam. Then we shall also have a session on potential frequently asked questions from farmers. And finally, we'll have a very important session on the agriculture insurance education strategy for Vietnam. So we have a few ideas of how the strategy could work, but the aim of this final session is really also to collect your feedback on what you think will be a suitable agriculture insurance education strategy for Vietnam. So that's basically the plan for today. And as was mentioned earlier, we also have a colleague from IFAD, the insured team at IFAD, who will be presenting in the afternoon on the insured program and what they are doing and so on. So as we move to the next slide on clarifications from day one. So yeah, in case you have any questions or any clarifications from the first day, we could discuss. I don't know if Tin, do you want to check with the participants around this?
Xin cảm ơn anh Tốt. Như anh Tốt có nói thì nếu như các chị có các cái thắc mắc, các cái vấn đề muốn tham khảo thêm trong các cái chủ đề của ngày hôm qua thì các anh chị có thể bây giờ có thể giơ tay và nêu cái vấn đề thì anh Tốt sẽ phản hồi ngay từ bây giờ. Thì có anh chị nào có ý kiến không ạ? Chị nào có góp ý gì không ạ? Nếu mà không có góp ý gì thì chúng ta có thể, hay ý kiến gì thì chúng ta có thể lưu lại ý kiến của mình vào cuối buổi cũng được. Thì nếu thế thì sẽ thuận lợi hơn. Bởi vì bây giờ chắc cũng mọi người cũng đang vừa tập huấn vừa ăn sáng, thành ra là cũng tương đối khó khăn, đúng không ạ? Rồi, bây giờ xin anh Tốt có thể tiếp tục cái chương trình của mình ạ.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, so we want to cover some of the key information related to livestock insurance in Vietnam. So first we'll talk about livestock, and then we will also talk about aquaculture. And this is in the context of the specific products which have been developed in Vietnam in line with Decree 58 as well as Decision 22 as well. So if we go to the next slide, yeah. So livestock insurance is designed specifically for the livestock sector. So it's currently available in Vietnam for different categories of animals, such as buffaloes and cows, in terms of dairy cows, and also for breeding and meat purposes. So cows which are being raised for milk, breeding, and meat as well. But of course, the livestock products can also be extended to many other categories like pigs, chickens, and so on. Now, as per Decree 58 in 2018, it encourages insurance companies to develop insurance products for buffaloes, cattle, cow, pig, poultry, and so on. However, Decision 22 in 2019, um, as per that decision, it's providing premium subsidies and incentives currently only for buffaloes and cattle insurance, not for the other animal categories. Yeah, and only for specifically for those 8 provinces that are mentioned there. Yeah. So on that basis, livestock insurance currently is essentially being applied for cows and buffaloes in the context of of milk production, breeding, and meat production as well. So that's the only livestock category for which the insurance products are currently being provided as per Decision 22. Yeah. So that just gives the background of which animals we're talking about and in which locations, and also it mentions the underlying legislation around that. Of course, we will be looking more at the regulations and policy environment in the afternoon session. So if we go to the next slide, um, now how would so one of the very important aspects of livestock insurance is that it's really important to be able to identify the livestock properly, and to know whether which livestock actually is insured. Yeah, so it's important for the livestock to be properly identified using year tags. So basically tagging to the year in order to identify the livestock. And it's important for the livestock to be in a healthy state without any pre-existing illnesses or damages. Yeah. So that's a prerequisite in order for the insurance cover to be valid. So maybe just a point around that. So one of the challenges which sometimes comes up in livestock insurance is that maybe a farmer might have, say, 10 cows, and then the farmer decides to insure only one of them and not the other 9 cows. Now, that has, of course, it's understandable if, maybe the one cow is a special dairy cow and the farmer is, wanting to insure that, because if that animal dies, then that'll be a big financial shock to the farmer and so on. But on the other hand, as you can see, there are some challenges with doing that. Why? Because number one, it won't be clear which animal has actually been insured. In some countries, what has happened is, maybe a farmer insures, in the example I gave, like 10 animals, and then, no, sorry, insures one animal out of a herd of 10. But if any of the animal dies, the farmer might report a claim, and it's very difficult then for the insurance company to know whether that animal was actually insured or not. So there is this anti-selection that sometimes farmers have done in some other countries. But one of the ways around that, or one of the ways to mitigate that, is to really be able to identify the animal properly from the outset. And then at the time of claim as well, then there should be a verification to check that indeed it's the insured animal which has died. Just a quick point on this, on the same point, that there's another risk with insuring only a few of the animals within the herd, and which is that basically then the farmer might practice good risk management with the insured animal as per the requirements for the insurance cover and so on. But then for the other animals, there may not be good practice being followed. So in that case, the other animals, for example, might contract disease, or so there could easily be an outbreak of a disease, and then the entire herd is affected. Indeed, this can also happen if the herds are mixing with other herds, and so that's also possible if there's a contagion in the region, for example, which affects the insured animals as well. So anyway, so coming back to the requirements, it's important for the livestock to be properly identified. Year tagging is one way of identifying. There are other options as well. As I mentioned yesterday, in some countries, like in India, they use radio frequency identification device. So it's like a small chip that they insert behind the ear of the cattle under the skin. Again, in some countries, for example, in Bangladesh, what they're doing is using a device in a kind of a necklace that they put around the cattle's neck, so which is not possible to take it off. So that there are different ways of monitoring the cattle. Maybe another point to make here is sometimes the monitoring can also be, if, for example, as we were looking at some of the options yesterday of whether the products are sold on a standalone basis or bundled with other services like loans or inputs and so on. So if the product is bundled with, for example, loans, then even the bank or the financial institution which is providing the loan would want to monitor which animal is being purchased and so on. And even they would have their requirements on, good veterinary practices that farmers need to carry out. So in that case, the identification of the animal it should also be in line with the the approach being used to identify the animals by the bank, for example. So these are some of the aspects to think about in terms of identification of how the animals should be identified. But it's very important that they are properly identified, and that's also a way of controlling anti-selection that we were talking about yesterday. So the risk of farmers adversely selecting. So basically, more farmers who are likely to claim reporting a claim. Okay. And then in terms of the insurance policy, in terms of the duration, it's essentially up to 1 year. So only events which occur during the insured period, which is 1 year, are insured. Yeah. So in other words, it's typically this insurance product is not a multi-year product. It's up to a maximum of 1 year. So that's also just to think about that point a little bit. So what it means is if the policy is one year is the typical duration for most general insurance products anyway. I mean, so there, as I was saying yesterday, they are more short-term in nature, unlike life insurance, which might be over 30, 40 years. General insurance might be a few months even, or a year, or at the most, maybe 2 or 3 years like that. So 1 year is a typical duration for most policies. If you think about the motor insurance that we get and so on, typically the maximum you can buy it for is a year, usually. But then with livestock, it's again going back to the distribution channel. So just like it's important to be aligned with how the distribution channels are identifying the animals, in the same way, it's also important to be aligned with how what is the duration of the underlying service if there is a bundling with some other service. So, for example, if the duration of the loan is, if the loan is, say, for meat production, for beef fattening, for example, and that loan might be a short-term loan, it might only be six months or nine months, like that. In that case, the insurance cover could also potentially be adjusted to make it in line with the loan duration. Yeah. But of course, it could be that the underlying loan is, let's say, it's in relation to dairy cattle, and it's a multi-year loan. It's a 2 or 3 year loan. So in that case, the insurance policy, it could potentially be adjusted to make it a longer policy. But currently, the guidelines of this product in Vietnam is that it's on an annual basis. So in that case, the premium would have to be paid every year, basically, and the policy would have to be renewed every year um, for this kind of product. Okay, and then okay, and also important to reflect that only the events, the specific insured events occurring within the insured period are insured. So in other words, if the duration is for one year, then the cover basically lapses or ends after one year, unless it is renewed again, unless the policy is purchased again. So that's important to note as well, because sometimes, especially if it's a multi-year loan, or if the farmer wasn't aware of this, they might think that, okay, once they have paid insurance, the cover will be there even the next year, even the year after, and so on. So it's important to explain to the farmer that the duration is a fixed duration. So all of these features are really important to explain to the farmer when explaining the product. And we'll also talk about some of the frequently asked questions that farmers might have in one of the sessions today. Um, oh, all right. Can you hear me now? Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. So basically, what I was saying is it's important to communicate a lot of these key features to the farmers when the product is being marketed to them, or as part of the general awareness raising as well, of the farmers regarding livestock insurance. So another very important point to explain is that a concept of waiting period applies with livestock insurance. Yeah. So the waiting period applies. So let me explain what is the waiting period here. So the waiting period basically means, so it's basically a duration for which, during which, claims will not be applicable. So it's a duration after the policy has started, from when the policy starts, during which claims will not be applicable. So typically for livestock insurance, the waiting period is 10 days after the from when the date of the policy becoming effective, or in the case that, for example, if the animal is joining the herd, maybe it's transferred from another province. So in that case, the waiting period is 30 days. So it's 10 days since the animal joins the herd, or 30 days after the insured animal is transferred from a different province, whichever comes later. Yeah. So this waiting period is essentially applied for livestock insurance in the context of disease risks. So if the animal dies because of diseases, this waiting period applies. So now you may ask, why does this waiting period ask? Why does this waiting period apply? What is the what's the reason for it? Indeed, if the farmers might also think that this is a bit unfair, that why do they have to wait for 10 days after the policy had started, but the cover is not there for the initial 10 days. So that's important to understand that point. So the waiting period is a really important feature, because essentially it's a way for the insurance companies to manage the risk that of anti-selection, basically. So I think this is one of the ways in which anti-selection is managed. As I think there was a very good question yesterday on how anti-selection and moral hazard can be managed. Well, for anti-selection, certainly the waiting period concept can be quite useful. Why? Because the waiting period is basically to mitigate against situation, or it's to avoid a situation where the farmer maybe knows that, okay, this animal has a disease, this animal is quite sick, and it might die quite soon. So let me go and take out the insurance product. If if some farmer does that, so this is one way of mitigating that, or to reduce the impact of that. So it says that, okay, after the animal is insured, at least 10 days has to pass before claims are eligible. So 10 days is not a very long period of time, but it's just to mitigate against those cases where the animal is very sick and might die very soon, and then the farmer goes out and buys insurance specifically to in the expectation of getting a claim quite soon. So which would be an example of anti-selection, basically, of very active anti-selection. So yeah, so that's the concept of the waiting period. But the waiting period typically, I mean, again, for in the context of other livestock products, for example, and also in Vietnam, the waiting period should not apply for all reasons. For example, if the death is because of an accident, waiting period should not apply. It's really in the context of disease risks, because with accidents, one can argue that, okay, so an accident can happen anytime, right? So an accident is not something that the farmer can and can anticipate if it's a real accident. So that's why the waiting period is only applicable for the disease related risks here. Okay, so that's some of the points related to some of the information on the livestock insurance product. If we go to the next slide, so some other conditions are in terms of what conditions need to be met in order for the livestock to be insurable. So for the livestock to be insurable, at the time when the insurance contract starts, the animal should be in good health. It should not have any injury, or it should not have any sickness or disease or disability. It shouldn't have any physical malformation, and also it should be immunized. It should be vaccinated adequately against the insured diseases. So the point being that the vaccination protocol should be followed, and it should be followed as per the guidelines of a veterinary office. So they must also not be raised in epidemic affected areas. Yeah. Okay, so these are some of the key features of, or some of the key prerequisite conditions for the livestock insurance to be in place, along with the age criteria as well. So there's an age range that varies by the purpose of the livestock rearing. So for fattening cows and buffaloes, it's from six months to 6 years. And for dairy and breeding cows, it's from 6 months to 8 years. That's the age eligibility. So what is the purpose of having these conditions, or what is the reason for having these conditions? So all of these conditions on, in order for the livestock to become insurable. So the purpose is that as a result of the animal being in good health, without any disease or disability or physical malformation, with good immunization and within this age criteria, not being in an epidemic affected area. So as a result, essentially, a few things are happening. Firstly, the underlying risk itself is much lower than if none of these criteria was applied. So you can see that even from the insurance company's perspective, they are trying to, this would help, these guidelines would help to basically filter out those animals which are very high risk. Yeah. So given that the risk would be reduced, this should also have an impact on of course, the overall risk exposure that the insurers have, and as a result, it should also have an impact on the premium, right? So if none of these conditions was applied, then you would expect many more claims to be paid out. And as a result, the insurance premium would also become more expensive for all the livestock being insured, basically. And it's also essentially encouraging good risk management practices in a way. So, for example, having this requirement of immunization, of following these guidelines, that they should be in good health condition and so on. It's also encouraging or incentivizing good risk management outside of insurance as well. So those are two big reasons for having these kind of guidelines. So if we move to the next slide, which is about how the claims are actually reported. Yeah. So okay. So with claims, when the insured event occurs, so currently these products are essentially insuring the life of the animal. Yeah. So if the animal dies, then claims are, claims might be eligible. Yeah. So yeah, so it's basically ensuring the life of the animals. So if the animal dies, then the policyholder, let's say the policyholder is the farmer in this case. It could also be someone else. It could be a legal representative of the farmer, for example. But yeah, in the event that the animal dies, the policyholder must notify the insurance company as soon as possible. So within 24 hours. They must strictly follow the instructions of the insurer, and they should also notify the relevant agencies or authorities about the reason for the animal's death. And they should also request the inspecting company, as approved by the insurer, to verify and authenticate the death in a written form. So you can see that there is these multiple steps that the farmer would have to perform. Firstly, notify as soon as possible. So within a day, basically, within 24 hours, they must notify. They shouldn't wait a long time after the animal has died. Then they should follow the instructions that the insurer gives them. They should also notify the relevant agencies or authorities about the reason for the animal's death. Yep. And they should also request the request the inspection company approved by the insurer to authenticate the death in a written form. So there's quite a few responsibilities that the policyholder has in terms of reporting claims. Now, within 3 months of the insured event, so that's quite a long duration, but so within that 3 months, the policyholder must send the insurance company the claim documents. So the claim documents, this includes the claim form, the insurance policy, original year tag, if it's available, if it's not missing because of the insured event, like a flood, for example, or some other natural disaster in which the animal is missing. But if it is available, they should send the original year tag. And then the certificate of the latest vaccinations and any other relevant documents that the insurer asks. So in other words, for the claim to be processed, firstly, it's very important for the claim to be reported quickly and for the protocols to be followed as per the previous box. And then secondly, the policyholder then should also be submitting the claim documentation as soon as possible. But for doing this, there's actually some time given to the policyholder. So up to 3 months, within 3 months, all of these documentation would have to be submitted. Yeah. So you can see the different documentations. There's of course the claim form, the insurance policy, which proves that the the farmer had the insurance in the first place. The year tag. So that's as I was mentioning it's used to basically record the animal that's being insured, and then also to verify that indeed it's that animal which is where the claim is being reported for. So in order to reconcile the claim with the animal that was originally insured. And then also the certificate of the latest vaccinations, because the point being that the farmer should be complying with the vaccination schedules. So that this is also another way of encouraging farmers to follow the vaccination schedule, that they would actually have to prove that the vaccinations were being done as per the guidelines and as per the schedule. Okay, so in the next slide, we then have some other features around the claims process. So the insurance company would then have to collect. It all depends on what was the reason for the claim for the animal to die. So it could be related to, for example, if it was related to a natural disaster. Or if it was related to an epidemic. So then in that case, the insurance company would have to collect written proof of the natural disaster or epidemic as issued by authorized agencies. Then the insurance company would usually have to send an inspection company to go and verify the reason for the loss. So again, the report that has been completed, the loss minutes completed by the inspection company would have to be submitted to the insurance company. And then also the confirmation of the death of the animal, which would include one photograph with the year tags and one photograph of the body of the animal. So you can see it's also important for the farmer, like when there is, when the animal dies, to actually take these pictures, to take the picture of the body of the animal, also the picture of the animal with the ear tag. And these are also ways of verifying that it's the insured animal which has died, for which the claim is being paid. Okay. So there's quite a few documentation that's required here, and proof that's required here to basically verify whether an event occurred or not. Now, within the first point here about collecting proof of natural disasters or epidemic, I think as per some of the interesting discussions that was coming up yesterday, that how do we basically, how is it possible to process the claims quickly? Because there, of course, we heard about some of the issues that have been experienced with claim delays and so on. So I think this is also a very interesting area where modern technology can be brought into play. Because, for example, if it is natural disasters, of course, it's still important to verify with the authorized agencies on whether a natural disaster really occurred in that area or not. But in addition to that, it might also be possible to use satellite data, for example, to track natural disasters. So if events like floods or cyclones or drought, basically any weather-related event could potentially be tracked using satellite data. It may not always be extremely accurate, but it depends, I mean, on the actual parameter being used and so on. It is possible to monitor these events using satellite data. Apart from satellite, of course, it's also possible to monitor the events using ground weather stations and so on. So in other words, it doesn't mean that even without having a pure index insurance product, the way we were looking at the index insurance options yesterday, but we can use many of the tools and technology that are used for index insurance, even for the quick verification of indemnity events. So there's a few ideas there on how maybe the claims process could be made smoother. But currently, the insurance company actually needs a written proof from the authorized agencies in the area on events like natural disasters or epidemic. And of course, it also needs the report from the loss inspection company, and also it needs to verify that the animal which has died was indeed the animal which was insured as well. So that's why it needs the photographs of the animal with the year tag, and also a photo of the body of the animal. Okay. Then in addition to these requirements, another important aspect to consider is the insurance company, they currently in the policy, they would actually apply what's known as a deductible um, before the insurance claim is paid. Yeah. So the deductible is about 30% for natural disasters or 40% for diseases. Yeah. And then, so what's the concept of a deductible, or what is a deductible? So essentially, this is another way of the insurance companies managing their risk, and to some extent, it's also a way of managing certain types of moral hazard. But in this case, in the context of livestock, it's more to do with managing risk. So essentially, the concept of deductible implies that there's a form of risk sharing taking place between the insurance company and the farmer. So, for example, what it means is if the deductible is 30%, for example, so it means that if the animal dies, then the insurance company will pay only, so the first 30% of the claim is actually the responsibility of the farmer. The insurer won't pay that. They'll only pay the balance, which is 70%. In the case of diseases, it's even higher. 40% of it is retained by the farmer. The insurance company pays 60%. Now, one might argue that, or one might, justifiably think that, okay, this deductible is very steep, or why have the deductible? And that's a valid point. The deductible, basically, the reason for applying it is it's a way of risk management, or it's a way of controlling the claim cost, and as a result, again, of being able to manage the premium rate. It's also something that in many cases, deductibles, or let's say higher deductibles like these ones, are applied in the early years of a product, but then after some experience has been built for maybe a few years, then the deductibles can be reduced or maybe even removed completely. It's possible. So the idea is that the insurance company, there's limited data, there's not full visibility on what is the actual underlying risk, what are the actual probabilities of a risk occurring, and so on. So as a result, the insurance company might say, okay, let's start off with some relatively high deductibles to initially, and then if the experience seems to be quite good, then we could reduce the deductibles afterwards. So those are some different reasons why the deductible is applied from the insurance company's perspective. From the farmer's perspective as well, a deductible is actually useful because it's essentially, there's still a significant portion of the claim is being paid. So 60 to 70% of the total claim amount would be paid. But at the same time, because the deductible is in place, it should reduce the cost of the insurance product overall. So overall, the product can become more affordable. Just a quick separate point, that sometimes the deductibles are also used, say, if it's in the context of crop insurance, for example. So as we saw, in fact, yesterday, that on the rice product as well, there is a deductible applied there as well. So sometimes the deductibles can be used as a way of avoiding many small claims to be paid out. So this is the common practice even with other types of policies like motor insurance and so on. So the idea being that if the claims are very small, then maybe the the policyholder can deal with those claims themselves. They don't need insurance per se. And as a result, there's a cost saving because the claims are fewer, the claims expenses are fewer. As you can see with all the documentation required for the claims, there would be some expenses incurred as well by the from on the side of the insurance companies and so on. So anyway, so deductible basically disincentivizes many small claims to be submitted. But in this case, on livestock, since it's a matter of whether the livestock has died or not, the claims basically will the deductible is basically applied as a way of managing the claims cost, and hence it has an impact on the insurance premium as well. So the deductible is 30 and 40%, depending on whether it's to do with natural disasters or diseases. An additional rate of 20% deductible may also be applied if the insured fails to comply with the prescribed procedures of animal husbandry and epidemic prevention, or with the loss notification instructions. So in other words, again, it's to basically encourage the farmers to actually comply with good animal husbandry practices, with epidemic prevention practices, and also to comply with the loss reporting instructions. Because if they don't, then an additional deductible is applied, which is again quite high at 20%. So those are some of the conditions around the claims process. So as you can see, it's quite important to really to explain these features on the claims process to the farmers, because otherwise the farmers, there's quite a few things that the farmers need to do from their side. There's a loss notification process they need to comply with. So it's really important to explain all of this to the farmers. In the materials that have been developed, in the pamphlets and also in the manual, these processes are outlined in a lot of detail, giving all the steps. So I would encourage the participants to really review these materials afterwards if you've not done so already. And those materials can really be used to explain the claims reporting process and the entire claims process to the farmers beforehand, so to avoid the expectations of the farmers as well, or to manage the expectations of the farmer as well. Okay, then if we move to the next slide, which gives more details about what exactly the coverage is. So essentially, the insurance, this insurance product is compensating for the livestock dying because of these specific reasons. Yeah, so it's not actually covering death due to any reason, but it's very specific reasons. What are these reasons? So it's both natural disasters as well as diseases. Yeah. So in terms of natural disasters, the disasters which are covered include storms, tropical depressions, cyclones, lightning, heavy rains, floods, flash floods, other inundation, landslides, which have been caused by floods or by currents, land subsidence due to floods or currents, heat waves, droughts, also cold, hail, hoarfrost, earthquake, or tsunami. So you can see a whole range of natural disasters are being covered here. So if the animal dies because any of these natural disasters, then that is insured. Then diseases are also insured, but quite limited. So this is also a very important point to clarify, because I think this is an area where there could be some misunderstandings that farmers might think all diseases are covered. But these actually have some specific diseases like the foot and mouth disease and anthrax, which are covered. Okay, so that's in terms of the actual risks which are being covered. Now, Essentially, the natural disasters as well as the diseases, these need to be certified or announced by the relevant authorities. So there's a very significant role that the relevant authorities will play in terms of actually certifying or announcing these risk events. So again, you can see that with a lot of these natural disasters, maybe one way of improving the process overall, both for the insurance companies as well as for the farmers, is that for a lot of these natural disasters, potentially satellite data or other types of weather data can be used for the monitoring of these events, so that in addition to the official announcement by the relevant authorities, it's also possible to monitor these events quickly and then to be able to respond to these events quite quickly. Okay, so that's all the key features I wanted to talk about relating to aquaculture, related to livestock insurance. I'm sure you might have some more questions related to livestock, and of course, we can take questions afterwards when we have the Q&A session in the morning or even afterwards. And also, I would encourage again to really to review the pamphlets which were developed, because that contains a lot more information about the product in more detail. We just wanted to talk about the key features, but there's a lot more information about the livestock product in the pamphlet. And another category of products which are in scope in Vietnam is aquaculture insurance. So with aquaculture insurance, again, I'll touch upon the main topics. I think we already started some discussions on aquaculture insurance yesterday as well. Yeah, so with aquaculture insurance, this is designed specifically for the fisheries sector, and it's currently available in Vietnam for, as per the regulations, it's the aquaculture in scope is white-leg shrimp and black tiger prawns. However, this can also be developed for other major aquaculture categories as well, such as catfish, for example. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the underlying regulations and the area of focus, again, as per Decree 58 in 2018, this encourages insurers to develop insurance products for tiger shrimp, white-leg shrimp, Pangasius, etc. However, Decision 22 of 2019 currently provides the premium subsidies and incentives only for black tiger shrimp and white-leg shrimp. And again, it's for specific provinces, so these 5 provinces. So on this basis, the aquaculture insurance is currently only applicable for the black tiger shrimp and white-leg shrimp, as per these regulatory guidelines or legislative guidelines. Okay, so if we look at some of the details of this product in the next slide, so some of the specific features of aquaculture insurance in Vietnam. Now, the insurance duration or the insurance period is basically valid from the first farming day, which is the day of when the stocking of the shrimps takes place, until either the 120th day for black tiger shrimp or the 80th day for white-leg shrimp. So you can see that it's quite different in terms of duration compared to both the rice insurance product as well as the livestock insurance product. And this is because it's in line with the production cycle of the aquaculture production. So it's because each production cycle is basically for the black tiger shrimp, it's up to the 120 days are covered, and for the white-leg shrimp, 80 days are covered. So it's a much shorter duration compared to either livestock or rice insurance. Now, the insured, which is, say, it's the farmer who's the policyholder, so they would be compensated for any loss that occurs as a direct result of, as a consequence of the damage or loss because of natural disasters. Yeah, so this is very important that I know previously the aquaculture product also covered diseases, but then I think essentially there were some challenges with very high claims being reported for diseases, and I think we looked at the claims ratio. So this ratio of claims over the premium, and it was significantly above 100% for aquaculture in the past in Vietnam. Um, so that's as part of the National Agriculture Insurance pilot program that happened in the past. It was very high claims experience, and a lot of that claims experience was essentially because of the disease related claims. Yeah. So the disease related claims was really driving the very high claims experience. So the challenge is that with such high claims, it would not be possible then to continue such a program going forward, which is why which could be one of the reasons why basically the um, the cover now has been limited to natural disasters only. So essentially, it's for the loss of the aquaculture production in relation to any of these natural disasters. So again, you can see the typical disasters here are storms, tropical depressions, cyclones, lightning, heavy rains, flood, inundations, landslides because of rain or runoff, land subsidence because of rain or runoff, rising water, saline intrusion, heat wave, drought, hail, earthquakes, tsunamis, and so on. Now, these disasters rather, they have to be confirmed by the competent agencies. Um, so again, similar to livestock that we looked at earlier, for aquaculture as well, it is possible to use other types of information like satellite data or even weather station information to actually monitor and track some of these events, which can lead to quicker verification of the events. It can also lead to quicker claim payouts and so on. And also for the insurer to objectively be able to measure the events on a timely basis, even for the reinsurer to be able to monitor and measure the events on a timely basis. So those are the specific events which are covered. Then in the next slide, we see that in terms of the claims process. So again, there's quite a bit of information on the claims process given in the pamphlet, but a few some key points here, because I know this was also a question that was raised yesterday. In terms of the claims process, basically when the insured event occurs, so the insured event here can be any of these natural disasters. So when these natural disasters occur, the policyholder must notify the insurance company as soon as possible, and that's typically within 24 hours of the event occurring. And then within 1 month, it has to submit to the farmer should submit to the insurance company a copy of the insurance policy and a filled and signed claim form. Yeah. So as you can see, the timeline is a little bit tighter compared to livestock insurance, because with livestock there were three months allowed to report claims, but here it's within one month. Essentially, the claims should have to be reported, and that's understandable because the duration of the claim, the duration of the cover is also quite short. It's 80 days or 120 days, depending on the type of shrimps. So that's the reason why the duration is quite short of one month. The insurance company then would also have quite a few responsibilities. They must collect a written declaration of disasters, of the natural disasters, from the competent authorities. They would also have to collect the loss assessment minutes, which have been completed by the inspection company and approved by the as approved by the insurance company, and any other documents related to the claim. So the insurance company should also be collecting all of these documents. So that's in terms of the reporting, the claims reporting requirements. And then how are the claims actually calculated? So if we look at the next slide, so again, it talks about, okay, so the actual claims calculation formula is a little bit complicated. So I think that's something which we have actually covered in the pamphlet. We don't have the details in the slide here, but we have it in the pamphlet. But then in terms of making adjustments on the compensation, it's again similar to what we looked at for livestock, that there is a deductible applied of 30% for natural disasters. So again, the insurer would be applying a deductible as a way of managing the claims cost, and which would also have an impact on the insurance premium, which can be charged, and so on. And then the additional deductible of 20% is also applicable for in the context of if the insured parties or the policyholder, if they have failed to comply with the shrimp raising processes as regulated by the competent authorities, or if they have not complied with the loss notification process, then there can be an additional deductible which is also applied of 20%. So that's like essentially it's a penalty on the farmer if they have not complied with the good farming practices, the good shrimp raising processes, or they haven't complied with the loss reporting processes. And then the insurer would has to provide the compensation. So within 15 days of receiving all the valid claim documents, the insurer must provide compensation. Yeah. So there's also a timeline given to the insurer as to how quickly they have to make the claim payout. Yeah. Okay. So that basically covers some of the key points I wanted to I wanted to explain related to livestock insurance and aquaculture insurance. Again, I know you must have quite a few questions. I see quite a few comments and questions in the chat box as well. But maybe we could just continue with the next session before we, I mean, to basically to complete the rest of the morning session before we'll open up for questions. And I think we'll ensure that we have enough time to address all the questions. Okay, then we can move into the next topic, if that's okay, which is the background to the technical topics of pricing, data, satellite monitoring, and so on. Okay, so this is again a very important, this is really information for the participants of this training to, to understand in terms of their background. Of course, we do not expect that, it may not be appropriate to talk about a lot of these technical topics when these products are explained to the farmers, because this is more aspects that the insurance company needs to keep in mind. But it's just for the information of the participants here today that, what are some of the technical work that is happening in the background related to the product design, the data requirements, pricing, and so on. So we'll just touch upon some of the main concepts in this presentation. And of course, there's a lot of details one can go into on these technical topics. It's possible to have like a whole week's worth of training or even more just on these technical topics. So, okay, if we look at the next slide, which is introduction to the technical topics, and related to the data requirements as well as the product design considerations. So firstly, on the data requirements, so for all these different types of products that we've been talking about, which are in scope in Vietnam: the rice insurance, the livestock insurance, and aquaculture insurance. What type of data is required by the insurance companies, or by any service provider, in order to develop these types of products? So there's a number of different types of data required. So the main categories are weather data, yield data, and then of course there are categories relating to livestock and aquaculture. And then there's also data or information needed around the crop calendar, the farming practices, the historical data as well on the frequency and severity of insured risks, and so on. Now, what is this data used for actually? So all of this data is basically used for designing and pricing the products based on the specific information on the farming practices and based on the specific risks which are experienced. Yeah. So let me talk a little bit more about the different items here. So for example, with the weather data is a very important type of data set. The weather data is, of course, it's essential in the context of weather index insurance. It is essential. So to give an idea, for weather index insurance, typically one would need between at least the last 20 years of data, or at the very minimum, at least the last 10 years of data, but ideally 20 years. And then going back as far back as possible. So, for example, say in the context of a lot of the satellite data sets which are available also in Vietnam, for example, CHIRPS, it's a kind of satellite data set, which is a rainfall estimation. So that data set goes back close to 40 years, from the early 1980s onwards. Yeah. So it's very important for there to be sufficient weather data available. And with this weather data, though, of course, the weather data would be relating to different relevant parameters. So as you saw with the examples given on the natural disasters being covered, there's a range of natural disasters. So as much as possible, the weather data should actually relate to as many of these risks as possible. So in terms of parameters, that would include rainfall, temperature, wind speed, soil moisture, and so on. So also the occurrences of landslides or occurrences of tsunamis. So both weather as well as non-weather natural disasters. So this data, what is this data being used for essentially? So it's being used for a number of reasons. Firstly, from the perspective of the product design or even the pricing, it can help us understand what is the frequency of events. And of course, in different parts of Vietnam, the frequency or the likelihood of the events would vary a lot, right? So in some areas are more cyclone prone, some areas might have more droughts happening or more floods happening, and so on. So it would give us an idea about the frequency. It would also give us an idea about the severity, about the impact of these events. So when an event happens, how bad is that event, or how volatile is the weather patterns in an area. The weather data gives us lots of other information. It gives us an idea about when the seasons start. So, for example, with rainfall-dependent farming, it's very important for, of course, the farming to be in line with when the rainy season starts. And it's also important for the product cover to be in line with that, so that the seasons are being covered properly. So again, the weather data, for example, the rainfall data will give us an accurate idea of what are the, at what time should farmers be planting, when should the season start, when should the insurance cover start, and so on. And then, of course, for index insurance, for weather index insurance, essential to have this weather data because remember the underlying index for weather index insurance is the weather data itself. It's basically a weather index, a weather-based index. So with the weather data, let's say if it was wind speed data, for example, we can then construct an index based on the wind speed to say that, okay, if the wind speed is above 100 kilometers an hour over 2 days, it's seen as this category of a cyclone and so on. So there are different ways of basically using the weather data. Okay, so the weather data, as I mentioned, there are multiple sources of satellite data from which which is a source of weather data. The weather data can also be obtained from ground weather stations. Typically, the weather stations, as much as possible, automatic weather stations are preferable, but also manual weather stations can also be applicable. Yeah. So the weather data is really important from the product design and also from the pricing perspective. At the same time, the yield data, the crop production data is really important because of many reasons. So firstly, the yield data is essential for yield index insurance. So in order to, because with yield index, the index that is used as a proxy for the loss is a yield-based index, right? So then the historical yield data is used to construct this index and then to check whether the index has triggered or not and so on. So the yield data is really important for that. The yield data also gives us an idea of which were the bad seasons. So in which seasons was yield very low compared to the normal yield. So the yield deficit was low or was high. So the yield data gives us an idea about that aspect as well. The yield data also it gives us an idea about what is the normal yield to expect. For example, for rice, for a certain variety, what is the normal yield which can be which is expected, and then as a result, if the insurance benefits are linked to the expected yield or the expected revenue that the farmer might expect, then we can use those estimates to also estimate, what is the normal revenue, the normal income for the farmer. So there's a number of applications we can see for the yield data as well. And the yield data now, it's typically available from the Ministry of Agriculture. Um, it could also be available from some research institutions. It's also potentially available from some of the agribusinesses which are working in the sector. They should also have their own data or their own estimates of yield data as well. Now, it's very important to use these data sets in combination with each other. So I know as one of the questions raised yesterday was that with if you're using satellite data, then that's fine, but then sometimes there might be a big discrepancy, a big difference between what the satellite data is showing and what what the reality is on the ground and so on. So again, there are different ways of potentially mitigating that scenario. One way is to basically carry out a lot of validation before deciding on which satellite data source to use. I'll give you an example. Let's say in the context of Vietnam, there must be in excess of maybe 5 or even more satellite data options which are available, because that's usually the case in most countries. And so with the satellite data options now, it would be important to select some specific areas where the historical yield data can also be collected, the historical loss data also collected, maybe some additional feedback from farmers as well. And then that satellite data and the indices based on the satellite data should be very thoroughly validated compared to these other measures like yield data, loss data, farmers' feedback, and so on. So that kind of validation or ground truthing is really very important. It takes some time to do that, But it's really important to do that in order to know whether the satellite data is actually accurately picking up issues or not. I think at the end of the day, satellite data doesn't, it. We should not expect it to always be able to pick up events, but what we can expect it to do is to really pick up the bad years. So the very bad seasons when yield was significantly below normal, or there was a major problem with the weather conditions and so on, then satellite data should be expected to pick up those very bad seasons, but maybe not all the nitty gritty or all the detailed experiences in a particular area in every season. So it's important to do this kind of validation of comparing both the yield data and the weather data to do this kind of ground truthing before deciding on which satellite data set to actually use. Yeah. Okay. So that's in terms of the weather and yield data. And then, of course, it's important to collect for example, for livestock and aquaculture, it's important to collect mortality data, um, possibly sickness data as well, if it's available. So collecting this mortality and morbidity data or sickness data relating to livestock and aquaculture can give us an idea about, it's essential in order to design and price the product. Yeah. So because the pricing of let's say livestock and aquaculture as well would really be very strongly affected by the mortality rates of the livestock and aquaculture that's being insured. When doing this assessment, it's important to note that the mortality data is of course affected quite strongly by vaccination practices. So for example, for livestock, we see that in places or in situations where the good vaccination practices are being followed, mortality data is much lower. The mortality experience is much lower compared to if the livestock is not being vaccinated. So as a result, when we look at the data, we should basically, if we are using data of livestock which has been vaccinated, then again, it's really important for the requirement to be there in the product as part of the product conditions for the same vaccination practices to be practiced when the product is implemented. Yeah. On the other way around, if the mortality data we are using is of the general livestock, but not with good farming practices, in that case, what we can do is we can still use that data, but then we can make adjustments in the pricing to allow for the assumption that in reality the experience is going to be much better because of the good practices are going to be followed, for example. Okay, so very important for to have this mortality data as well, which again, this can be available typically from the statistical office. It could also be obtainable potentially from some of the research institutions, and also potentially from some of the agribusinesses, for example, which are working in these value chains. Yeah. Then it's very important to also to have the crop calendar and the farming practices information. This information is very important because this gives us an idea of when for example, the crop calendar would affect when the insurance cover should actually start. Yeah. So this is a very important feature because typically with, for example, with crop insurance, it's important for the cover to start from when the planting actually takes place and then all the way until the end of the crop cycle, ideally. So then it's important to know what the crop calendars are, when exactly the farmers are planting, or if there's a window within which they're planting, it's important to know that as well. Also important to know what are the, for example, the planting practices and in general the farming practices. So that would give us an idea about both the duration of cover. Um, it would also give us an idea about what type of policy or what type of product would actually be suitable. So, for example, if we know that the farmers have there's a lot of irrigation going on, then maybe some of the weather index products, which are based on rainfall, for example, are less relevant because the farmers have access to irrigation. So in that case, maybe other types of products like yield index, or even weather index, but measuring other types of parameters like soil moisture, those might become more applicable. So it's very important to understand the farming practices of the farmers in detail. And then, of course, very important to have the historical data of how frequently the insured events occurred and the severity of the insured events, because this gives us, this would give us a very good baseline to use for the pricing, because the pricing basically is a combination of the frequency or the likelihood of a risk event, and then the severity or the size of the risk event. Yeah. Um, so this historical data on the frequency and severity of the events are very important. The historical data on the frequency and severity, this can be again collected either through the weather data, or indeed there could also be other sources of this information. Um, so to give some examples, for example, in some countries, in Europe, for example, there were some studies done where they actually used records from newspaper records of when certain events took place. So they went through the past data and collected information on how frequently did a certain event take place, for example, drought, for example, or a cold spell, and how severe was it, and so on. But of course, it's useful to have more precise data, either based on weather stations or satellite data. But it's also important to collect this information even directly from the farmers. So if you're doing a survey or a focus group discussion with farmers, you can actually ask them questions on how frequently does a certain event take place, or do they remember in the last 10 years, how many times have they experienced a flood event? How many times have they experienced a drought event? And so on. So this just gives an idea about the actual experience in that localized area before we then compare it to other sources of information, such as the satellite data and the weather station data and so on. Okay, so those are some of the information I wanted to provide related to the data requirements. Now, all of this data would be used as part of the product design process. So the product design, in general, agriculture insurance products should be designed very, very carefully, and they should take into account the different factors, such as the relevant risks being insured. And of course, in this context, um, the key products are crops, livestock, aquaculture. So it's really important to take into account the different factors such as the relevant risks for crops, livestock, aquaculture. It's also important to take into account the good farming practices, the fact that, the good farming practices or veterinary care should be in place in order, for good product design and pricing of these products. So essentially, the data availability, the claims assessment process, the risk management measures, all of these should also be taken into account in the product design. So with the product design, we would, there's a few aspects to this. One is to take into account the available data and to see how this data can be used for both designing as well as pricing the insurance products. So for the pricing, of course, the data will be used to measure the likelihood or the probabilities of the risk event happening, and then the impact of the risk events. And then when it comes to yeah, so that's in terms of the pricing of the actual underlying risk. And then the product design should also take into account the actual agricultural practices. So in other words, if for example, if we know that the farmers are planting at a certain time and the crop cycle is of a certain duration, the different phases of the crop cycle are of these durations, the crop water requirements are of this amount. So the insurance product should take all of that into account. And then the product design would basically, there should be inputs from an agronomist, from an agronomical point of view, the product should be as sound as possible. But then it should also have to be financially viable for the insurance company at the end of the day. So this is where the pricing function comes in. So if you move to the next slide, which talks about pricing. So once we have collected the data, we have analyzed the data, we have designed the product, and now the product needs to be priced. So what are some of the considerations on from the pricing perspective? Okay, these are the ones. So relating to pricing, yeah, in terms of the pricing, it's really important for the pricing of agriculture insurance products to take into account the nature of the underlying risk, including the chance or likelihood or the probability of the insured event occurring and the expected size of the event. So these two factors are the biggest driving factors in the in sort of measuring the risk involved. So once we have measured the risk involved, we would know what the risk premium is. Once we know what the risk premium is, it's then possible to calculate the final premium. Yeah. So the pricing basically requires sufficient historical data in order to be able to estimate on a scientifically and fairly, in order to calculate the premium rates based on the actual risk in different locations and for different crops. So essentially what we are doing is, let's say, let's give an example. Let's say it's a yield index product for rice, for example, and we have collected a lot of data related to yield, related to weather, related to the farming practices, the loss experiences, and so on, and for a specific area. And then the product has also been designed keeping in mind all of the above factors. And also it's been designed using the agronomical information. So it's agriculturally, it's a sound product. Yeah. Now, in that case, we now come to, we would now have to price that product. So if you are pricing that product, what we would need to know is to understand how frequently would the product have paid out in the past. And then what is the amount of the payouts? Let me give you a quick example. Let's say with the yield index insurance, if we see that, okay, the product is paying out once every 5 years, it's paying out. And when it pays out, in some years it paid out maybe only 20%. In some years it paid out 100%. So this is the percentages of the value insured, of the sum insured, whatever it was, either the value of the revenue or the value of the cost of production and so on. Now, if we know that the typical frequency of payout is like 1 in 5 years, for example, so that would be a 20% chance of paying out, basically. So, or a 1 in 5 year chance of paying out. And if we know that the average payout would be, let's say it's coming to 40%, for example. Yeah. So if it is 40% as the average payout, and the chance of it paying out is 20%. So then your risk premium, just based on that, without any other adjustments, just the pure risk premium would then be 20% multiplied by 40%, which is 8%. So just the basic risk premium is 8%. But then, of course, in addition to that, you would need to adjust for the trend. You'd need to adjust for seasonality, for various other factors, for uncertainty, and then there would have to be some loadings for expenses, for profit, and so on. So you might end up with a much higher premium of maybe 12% or something. So then you'll see that, okay, this is that premium might be quite expensive if it is, say, 12%. It's a very expensive product. So then what you can do is you can go back into the product design work again and see whether the product can be designed in a different way. Maybe the frequency of the risk could be reduced. So instead of 1 in 5, you're covering the 1 in 7 or 1 in 10-year event. Or maybe the size of the payouts, instead of the average payouts being 40%, maybe it could be reduced to 30%, and so on. So you can see the pricing and the product design are kind of interrelated with each other. They're very strongly linked to each other. So the pricing requires sufficient historical data in order to scientifically and fairly calculate the premium rates. And then essentially the pricing should also, typically the pricing would vary by location or vary by crops, usually. Yeah. So for example, in locations where the risk occurs on a more frequent basis, there the both the likelihood of the risk as well as the severity or the size of the payouts would be higher. So the premiums there are expected to be quite high. Yeah. As opposed to locations where the risk events occur very rarely. So the pricing would vary by location. It can also vary by crop, of course. So there would be certain crops which are more easily affected by the same weather events. Let's say in the context of drought, if you have a crop like, for example, with rice, it might be affected more easily by drought. But if you have other crops like, say, cassava, for example, it's quite drought resistant, and so on. So again, in that case, the premiums will also vary by the type of crops, even for the same for the same level of risk and the same location. And it's important for the pricing to accurately reflect the underlying risks involved in the specific location, because otherwise the farmers might receive a product that is it's not appropriate. So for example, they might, if the product has not been accurately priced for that specific location, farmers who are in quite a low risk area, they might, the product might be very expensive, so they may not be satisfied with that, and they may not want to purchase such a product. If the pricing is not done accurately, it can also lead to anti-selection. So again, good pricing is also another way of controlling for anti-selection, for example. Yeah, because if let's say if the pricing is not done correctly, and as a result, let's say there are two areas. So the one area is very low risk, and the other area is very high risk. If the same premium is charged between the two areas, then there's actually a risk of anti-selection. Why? Because in the areas which are low risk, the farmers would say, okay, or might feel that the premium is too high for them, so they're not incentivized to take up insurance because the premium is actually too high for them. Whereas in the high risk area, maybe the premium is too low for them, so they are encouraged to take up the insurance product. So then the insurance company might end up with very few low risk farmers on board, but a much higher proportion of high risk farmers who are on board, and as a result, that that essentially leads to an element of anti-selection, which also leads to the insurance premium becoming high, and then and which also causes problems with affordability and so on. So it's really important for the pricing to accurately reflect the specific risks in specific areas as well as for specific crops. But then, having said that, one of the operational challenges that comes up is, sometimes it may not be possible to differentiate the risk too much because of operational reasons. So, for example, in a particular district, it may not be possible to have different premium rates within the same district. It might have to be the same premium rate for the same crop across the whole district. But then if you look at if you analyze the data of specific communes within the district, there might be a lot of variation in the risk experience. Some communes might be very low risk, some might be very high risk, and so on. So, in other words, but because of operational reasons, it may not be acceptable to vary the premium rates by every commune, for example, or every village, and so on. So, as a result, to some extent, it may not be possible to always vary the premium rate. So, one way of managing that, especially for index insurance, one way of managing that is by varying the trigger levels. So the threshold at which the payouts start. One way of managing the different risks is by, for example, if the same premium has to be maintained somewhere, or even countrywide, if there's some product where the same premium rate has to apply everywhere, that can be done. But the way of doing that is by varying the trigger levels. So in that case, what would happen is those areas which are more high risk, there the trigger levels will be stricter, and those areas which are low risk, there the trigger levels will be more lenient, for example. Okay, so those are some of the key points I wanted to mention related to pricing. Of course, if you have any questions on any of these technical topics, we can go into that in the question answer session. And then moving into another very important point, which is basis risk. Okay. Basis risk management. So basis risk is actually something which I think it was also mentioned by one of the participants in the comments and discussion yesterday. What is basis risk? So basis risk is a major limitation, or it's a major challenge of index-based insurance products that we should be aware of. Basically, the basis risk occurs if the index measurements do not match the actual loss which has been suffered by the insured party, be it the farmer or the legal representative of the farmer or the institution which is insured, and so on. So the basis risk occurs if there is a mismatch, basically, between the farmer's experience and the insurance payout. So it can be if there are losses which have been incurred in the field, in the insured field, but the index does not trigger a compensation. So let's say a situation where the farmers have suffered a loss because of, let's say, drought, for example, drought conditions or dry conditions, and let's say, but the insurance product does not trigger payouts. So that is a major, as you can see, that would be a major problem, because now the farmer was insured, had paid premium, or was aware of the insurance product as well, and so on, was expecting the insurance compensation, and now there is no payout, or there's a very small payout. Yeah. Okay, so that's basis risk. But why does basis risk occur? What's driving basis risk? So it could be for a number of reasons. Before we look at some of the potential solutions, it could be for many reasons. Firstly, it could be because maybe that specific risk was not covered in the first place. I'll give a quick example. In Zambia, we had um, a particular season where farmers were insured with a weather index product. And in order to make the product cheaper, they actually came back with a request that, look, can we remove excess rainfall cover? We don't want cover from excessive rainfall. It's not a problem for us. Our main concern is drought. We want cover only for drought. Okay. So accordingly, the product was developed only for drought. Then as the season started, they actually got an excess rainfall event that unfortunately, it led to the crop germination failing and so on. But then unfortunately, the insurance company would they would not want to they didn't want to make a payout, because they said, look, this was not covered. This was explicitly taken out of the cover. So anyway, so one of the reasons that it's not really basis risk, it's more of a coverage issue. But that's one of the fundamental problems first, that maybe that risk or peril was not covered in the first place. So that's one basic reason. But then there are many other reasons. It could be that, for example, the farmer suffered a loss because of drought, and indeed drought was also covered under the insurance product, but yet there is no payout, or there's a very small payout. Now that can be for various reasons. One is that maybe it's not known exactly where the farmers are located. So maybe what was being used as a reference point, or it was being done at the commune level, or at quite a large level, but it needed to go at a more granular level. So it could be that within a district, overall the district didn't suffer a drought, but certain communes were very badly affected by a drought. So if the monitoring is happening at the level of the district, it may not pick up the droughts which occur at a more localized level. It could be there are some microclimatic conditions at a very localized level which were not captured by the monitoring, which was over a larger area. So spatial basis risk or geographical basis risk is also, it's very relevant. Um, okay, and then it can also occur for other reasons. It can occur because maybe again limited to the area, that maybe it was being done at the maybe the GPS coordinates, the latitude, longitude of the specific areas were not available. That could be a reason. So we, again, as a result, it wasn't known exactly where the farmers' fields are located. And then also a very important reason is that sometimes because of the pricing of these products, and because maybe the price has to be kept at a certain level and so on. So as a result, the trigger levels, the thresholds at which the payouts start, those trigger levels might become very strict. Yeah, so they might be quite very stringent or very strict trigger levels. So as a result, maybe it is still covering drought, but it's not covering the 1 in 5 year drought. It's covering the 1 in 7 year drought, the 1 in 10 year drought, like that. So it could be that the trigger levels become stricter in order to cover rarer events, as a way of managing the premium, basically. Yeah, as a way of keeping the premium to a certain level. Of reducing the premium, basically. So that's again a very important source of basis risk. And indeed, a lot of the basis risk we see in different countries for index insurance, it's actually because of that limitation on the pricing, which forces the product to have a very strict trigger level. So what are some of the ways of managing basis risk now? There's a few ideas. Of course, none of these, all of these may not be applicable at the same time, and also all of these options might be quite tricky to apply. They will be challenging to apply. But there's a few ways of managing basis risk. So one way is by using reliable and good quality historical data for appropriate product design and pricing. Yeah. So in other words, the more data we use, so as I was mentioning, if we have good quality satellite data, weather station data, as well as the yield and loss data, if you use the combination of these data sets, then you'll have more suitable, more appropriate product design as well as the pricing. You'll be able to validate the products more thoroughly and have a more accurate product from the outset. It's also important to explain to the insured party, be it the farmers or even the other relevant stakeholders. It's really important to explain to them that, look, there is a link between basis risk and pricing. So generally speaking, cheaper the product is, higher is the basis risk. And you can see why, because I mean, if we use a very simple example, let's assume that a product, when it pays out, let's say it pays out 100%. Just a simple example. So if it pays out 100%, and it's paying out once every, it's expected to pay for a 1 in 10 year scenario. So like the worst event in 10 years, in that way. So in that case, you can see just based on that, the risk premium would be 10%. Yeah, because it's paying out 100% every 10 years. So that's 10%. But if it is paying out in a 1 in 20 year scenario, it's 5% in terms of the risk premium. Yeah, so that's 100% being paid out every 20 years. So you can see that uh, if, on the other hand, if it is paying out in a 1 in 10 year scenario, so it means that the 1 in 5 year scenario, 1 in 6, 7, 8, 9 year scenario are not covered. So you can have a situation where there's been a 1 in 8 year scenario. That's a pretty bad scenario, but still there is no payout because the product is only covering the 1 in 10 year scenario or worse events. And so that leads to basis risk. So there's a clear link between basis risk and pricing. And generally, cheaper the product is, higher would be the basis risk. So it doesn't mean that the product is just made more expensive, because that is also not possible to do. And also the product then is not affordable, or even if the premium subsidies involved, the subsidies will always have to be there and will be very high, and so on. So it's not about making the product more expensive, but it's basically for the insured party or the relevant stakeholders to appreciate that there's a link between basis risk and pricing. So that if a product is cheap, then they should also expect that there might be some problems with basis risk for this particular product, particularly in the context of index insurance. And then, of course, some other ways of managing basis risk is of providing these products at the group or aggregated level rather than for individual farmers. So the point here is that with index insurance products, generally, if we are trying to apply these index insurance products at the individual level, we are trying to manage basis risk at the individual farmer level. That's quite difficult to do because each individual farmer has their own farming practices. They also have their own individual risks. It's also may not be possible to know exactly where the farmers are located, and so on. So it's very difficult to have to manage basis risk fully at the individual farmer level. But I think the focus should be more on managing basis risk at the group or aggregated level, because that's a level at which index insurance products are actually more applicable. Yeah. Okay, and then another way is, of course, having this concept of hybrid products, of hybrid index products. So that's another way of managing basis risk. So if we have maybe a combination of using different satellite data sources, or a combination of using weather stations, and so that's another option of not relying only on satellite, but maybe using a combination of satellite and weather stations. So even if we're focusing on the natural disasters only, we can use satellite data because it has many advantages over weather stations. But then we also use weather stations in case the satellite did not detect a certain event, but the weather station was able to detect that weather-related event. Um, and of course, combining different types of index insurance products like weather index and yield index, that's another way of managing basis risk. Finally, another way is basically having better availability of data, like having access to yield data, having localized GPS coordinates of the farming areas. That's another way of managing basis risk. So if we know the specific localized areas, and we have access to, say, satellite technology at a high resolution and so on, it might be possible to really to have a very specific product for that localized area or for that localized farming area for the group of farmers. Yeah. Okay. So that's in the context of the better availability of data. Um, and now moving into another topic, which is on um, the use of satellite technology. So I mean, I won't go into this in too much more detail because we have already talked about this a few times. But essentially, satellite technology is something that is, I think, even in my experience in this sector, it's something which has, come up quite rapidly over the last few years. So I remember some years ago, I think this was in 2012 even, so almost a decade ago, or nine years ago, in Africa, for example, also in Asia, most of the products were not satellite based. They were all based on weather stations in the context of index insurance. Um, Indeed, in some countries, it was even the weather station data was like very sort of closely safeguarded. And I remember in Zimbabwe, for example, the only way that you could actually design or price a product is actually physically going to the meteorological department in Zimbabwe, sitting in their office on their computer and running the model on their computer. Literally, that was the situation in 2012. But then over the last few years, I mean, even as far back as since 2014 or so, things have changed a lot. So now, for example, in Africa, pretty much all the products which are going on weather index insurance, they are all satellite based. I'm not aware of any weather station based products which are still there. In some cases, weather stations are being used as a kind of backup method. So, in order to basically in the event that a certain event is not picked up by the satellite, so for double verification, weather station is used. But otherwise, the satellite technology is used a lot. And also in Asia, in many countries, I see satellite data is being used more extensively now. So I'll give the example of in Cambodia. In the past, they had some experiences with weather station-based weather index insurance. But then a few years ago, they did a satellite-based soil moisture index insurance product that was reinsured by Swiss Re. Now there's another product which is being introduced, which is again a satellite-based product, um, which is based on the CHIRPS satellite data. There's another satellite data source that was also being trialed there called GPM or TRIM. So satellite technology, it can be used in agriculture insurance for the monitoring of the weather conditions, as well as other parameters like the vegetation on the ground. So there's a number of different parameters which can be used, such as which can be monitored, such as rainfall, soil moisture, vegetation index, potentially temperature, wind speed, and so on. Also events like floods. So for example, in Bangladesh, they use satellite data there for the last couple of years now to measure the extent of flooding. So in at sort of sub-district level, they know the square kilometers in the district, and then when there's a flood, they know what percentage of the sub-district level has been flooded. So it's a parametric or index insurance product based on satellite estimation of flood levels. And this is a product which is being used by Oxfam and World Food Program currently for implementing. For basically, they are using this as as a way of financing disaster relief in the context of flooding. So maybe some even those types of products could potentially be relevant in Vietnam because, of course, flooding is quite a relevant risk in Vietnam as well. Um, but those are some of the some examples of using satellite data. But there could be differences, of course, between using satellite in terms of the satellite estimation and the experience on the ground. Yeah. So it's there could be some differences, and so we should recognize that these differences might be there, but still it is very useful, especially for index insurance, and even it's useful for other types of insurance products in order to actually monitor what's happening on the ground. Yeah. Let me give a quick example from Latin America. This is, for example, from Brazil. So in Brazil, what happens is when the insurance products for large commercial farmers, these are indemnity-based products. So when there's a loss, the farmer needs to report a claim. Then the insurance company sends an agent or representative to the ground to check whether the loss has occurred or not, and so on. Now, when they do that check, they have a handheld device with them, a tablet. And when they do the check, automatically based on the GPS of the field, they can automatically check on, there's a app they use. Um, they can automatically check what is the vegetation condition based on satellite data, what is the weather condition based on the satellite data for that particular farm. So that's also a way to cross check or kind of verify what they are hearing from the farmer about the problem that happened. Of course, they know that sometimes the satellite data may not fully pick up the event. But if, for example, they can see clearly in the satellite data that, yeah, there is a problem, there's a major drought which took place in this region in general, and then the farmer is also reporting a drought claim, then it's easier for them to verify that the claim might well be valid because even the satellite data says the same thing. So even in an indemnity insurance approach, using this kind of digital technology is quite useful as a way of verifying the events on the ground. And then, of course, other types of technology such as smartphones, sensors, mobile technology, or camera can also be used for monitoring of agriculture insurance products. Um, so just to give a quick example of this, again, from the context of India. So in India, as I was mentioning yesterday, they've had experiences with weather index as well as yield index insurance and so on. With yield index insurance, one of the challenges that comes up is, one can't rely only on satellite data with yield index. Um, so it's also important to carry out these yield assessments on the ground or crop cutting experiments, CCEs. Now, carrying out a CCE is quite tedious. It's actually harvesting a part of the field. That's how you get an estimate of the yield in that field. So, as you can imagine, it's quite a labor-intensive process to carry out a CCE. I've experienced some CCEs myself, and it can easily take even 2 or 3 hours to just do a one CCE in one field. So so anyway, so in that context, in India, they were trialing digital technology that's using mobile phone with artificial intelligence app, which was being used basically to take pictures of the field. So in other words, instead of actually doing the CCE, they would take pictures of the crop, and those pictures would be converted into yield estimates. Yeah, and then that would be used as the basis for the claim settlement. So this is a pilot they tried out in a few states in India. I'm not aware if that solution has actually been scaled up or not afterwards, but it's a pilot that they tried out in a few states in India. So the digital technology can certainly be used for taking pictures of damages, and then either using some more sophisticated technology to assess the damage using those pictures, or just taking pictures as a verification that indeed the damage has taken place. Apart from that, the technology can also be used for the distribution of the product itself. So, for example, the farmers could have an option of enrolling for the product using SMS or USSD functionality on their mobiles. There's a lot of scope of using mobile. Mobile messaging is also used for awareness raising. So, for example, there's also in Zambia and in some other countries, there are some numbers you can dial for accessing information related to certain services. So this can be related to many other services as well, of course. And the same concept can be applied for agriculture insurance. So, the farmer dials a certain number, and then they can hear pre-recorded voice messages, giving them information on that particular topic. Yeah. So if they want to find out about agriculture insurance, they dial that number and they get some basic messages. If they want to find out more about rice insurance, they press 1, they'll get information about that. If they want to find out about livestock, they press 2, and so on. Yeah. So it's possible to have these pre-recorded voice messages. There's a lot of other interesting things being trialed out, also related to awareness raising. There's For example, in some countries, there's this concept of using mobile phone based games. Uh, so these are not the kind of games even requiring a smartphone or something, but just games based on voice messages or based on text, which is being sent to the farmers. And so it's just a way of interacting with farmers as a way to encourage farmers to think about insurance, or for farmers to make a decision on whether they want to buy the insurance product or not, if it is suitable for them or not. So those are a few examples of how mobile technology can be used, both for the claims process as well as for collecting information for pricing and design, and also for issues of enrolling farmers, and for awareness raising as well. Maybe a last point, a very important point also on mobile technology is, in some cases, it's also being used for where mobile money is used. It could potentially be used for farmers to pay the premium, or also for the claims to be paid to them. Um, so mobile money is actually a very good channel for claims to be paid very quickly to farmers in places where they don't have access to other banking services. They could go to the mobile agent and receive the claim payout through mobile money. All right, so that's on those topics. And then moving on to just the last few technical topics before we talk about distribution. Um, okay, insurance underwriting. So insurance underwriting, we have mentioned this term a little bit before, just to define what it is exactly. Insurance underwriting is basically the process through which the insurance company is evaluating the risks involved, and it's deciding on the coverage level to offer to its clients. Yeah. So insurance underwriting is basically, it's another term for risk assessment. So how the insurance company makes a decision on the risk, on which risk to cover, whether a risk is insurable or not, and what should be the coverage level, what should be the type of product that can be offered to the clients, and also whether it should offer a product in the first place or not. So it's not exactly the same as product design, because the product design is the specifics of the particular product, but insurance underwriting is more the process that the insurance company is using to decide to evaluate the risks involved, and to decide on the coverage levels that it can offer to the clients, on whether it should offer a product in the first place, and if so, what type of product it should be. So for example, the experience which, let's say, related to aquaculture, if there have been bad experiences on, let's say, a lot of claims paid out because of diseases, and then the insurance company might, from its underwriting perspective, it might assess the risk exposure and say, okay, you know what, we can't offer diseases anymore. We can't offer the coverage for diseases anymore. We only focus on natural disasters, or we increase the deductible level, or indeed in the future we reduce the deductible level, or we remove the deductible completely. So these are all insurance underwriting decisions, on what level of risk the insurance company wants to take up in the first place. And then the reinsurance, as we've already talked about this yesterday, but just as a quick recap, reinsurance is basically when the insurance company is insuring itself by transferring the risks to a larger insurance company, which is also known as a reinsurance company. So reinsurance is very essential, as it enables the insurance company to pay claims even when there is where there are many claims occurring in the same area, or there's a very large claim that has occurred because of a total damage. So reinsurance cover basically enables insurers to respond quickly to such situations and repay and pay the claims. Indeed, we see that in some cases with agriculture insurance, there have been challenges in many countries with delayed claim payments. And I think as some of the experiences shared yesterday was also reflective of that. And one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, but one reason for the delayed claim payment could be because of maybe lack of reinsurance cover, or maybe the suitability of the reinsurance cover, because maybe some reinsurers are quicker to pay the claims than others. Because if, let's say, in a typical agriculture insurance product, maybe only a small percentage of the risk, maybe 20-30% of the risk might be retained by the insurance company, 70-80% of the risk might be reinsured out to the international reinsurer, for example. So in that case, if there is a claim, if that is the portion being used for the reinsurance purpose, then also the premium is split in the same way. So the premium, only 20% of it would stay with the local insurer, 80% would go to the reinsurer. Yeah. Now, in that case, if there's a claim, again, the same proportions are used. So only 20% is paid by the insurer and 80% needs to be paid by the reinsurer. So the quality of the rating, the quality of the reinsurer is very important, and also their general practice as to how quickly they can pay claims and so on. Reinsurance enables the insurance companies to settle the claims quickly, and also to still remain in business, to still remain solvent, even where large losses have to be paid. So it's really important way for insurance companies to manage their risk exposure. Okay, and then finally, the last technical topic I wanted to talk about is, in terms of the claims processing, just some principles around that basically for the indemnity-based products, claims should be reported as soon as they occur. So I think some of the guidelines we looked at for livestock and aquaculture previously, that's basically what it's reflecting, that as soon as the event has occurred, they should be reported within 24 hours. And then also the supporting documentation should be submitted as soon as possible. But there is some more time given to submit those documents. And then generally, one of the other concepts is that it's good for the assessment of the losses to be done by either by the relevant authorities or by an independent loss assessor. So in other words, it's good to have an independent or a neutral loss assessor who is actually doing the assessment of the losses. of course, all of this is in the context of indemnity insurance. But for index insurance, once the index has been triggered, so for the specific trigger levels, once the payout has been triggered, then automatically the payout is due to the farmers. So the insurer should then automatically pay the claims to all the insured farmers, or all the farmers where, well, all the farmers for whom the trigger has been, the index has been triggered. Okay, so that's a few principles relating to claims processing. And then on monitoring and evaluation, it's important to basically uh, to monitor different aspects of agriculture insurance. Some of the metrics which can be monitored from a kind of a client value perspective is the number of farmers or representatives as well who have been reached through trainings. So how many farmers have been trained, how many field operatives have been trained. Um, Also to understand, okay, who purchased insurance. So in terms of the number of farmers who have actually taken up insurance or renewed the product. Also to know the number of reported claims. This also gives us an idea of the risk as it emerges. The actual claim amount paid, the time it takes to pay the claim. This should also be monitored, because as we heard also yesterday, that if there's a long delay in the claim being paid, that erodes the trust in the whole in the insurance product, and the trust that farmers have in the whole concept. So, and then also any other feedback that can be collected from other relevant stakeholders, including farmers and other stakeholders like the aggregators or distribution channels. Those should also be collected. So those are some different ways of monitoring the experience as it emerges. And the monitoring of the experience, it should be done from different angles, at least three different perspectives, I think. It should certainly be done from the farmer's perspective to understand the client value in the product. So, for example, it's important to monitor aspects like the percentage of claims being reported. The claims ratio is usually a good indicator of client value as well. The time it takes for claims to be paid, the percentage of policies being renewed, and so on. The extent of the claim, so the percentage of the claim compared to the actual loss incurred. All of these metrics are relevant from a client value perspective. Um, and then from the insurance company's perspective, it's important to monitor aspects related to its business profitability. So for, again, claims ratio is an important aspect there. Also, they might want to track their expense ratio to understand what expenses are being incurred, their profit margin, the volumes of premiums or number of farmers, and so on. So it's important. So those are two dimensions, and a third dimension, or a third perspective from which the monitoring should take place, is also from the perspective of the potential distribution channels. Because at the end of the day, the insurance products should be serving, it should also have a strong business case for the distribution channels. If the involvement of the distribution channels are required and needed. And generally speaking, when it comes to small scale farmers, it's really important for the distribution channels to be to be involved as much as possible in order to reach and service a large number of small scale farmers. So in that context, we can now move to the last section I wanted to cover in the morning, which is on distribution channels. This is quite a short section. So in distribution channels, basically, just to recap some of the key aspects. In the next slide, we can see that, okay, in order for basically for insurance companies or for the government even, to reach a large number of farmers in the long run. So for in the long run, for a large number of farmers to be successfully insured, it's really important to that the farmers that the farmers are reached through different types of distribution channels or aggregators. So the point is, of course, it's also possible to insure the farmers individually or only through the farmer organizations as well. That's also possible, but it's much more difficult, and it'll take much more time, and it's more difficult also to uh, do as to do things like raising awareness on a continual basis, or potentially premium pre-financing, or even premium subsidies, and all the rest. So the distribution channels really play a key role there. So it's important to reach a large number of farmers through distribution channels, such as um, agribusinesses like input companies or contract farming companies, banks, other financial institutions like microfinance institutions, farmer organizations, NGOs, and so on. Yeah. So these distribution channels, now they would, as we saw also in some of the examples from yesterday, the distribution channels would also end up playing quite a big role in different aspects of implementing agriculture insurance. So, for example, in providing data, or even negotiating on behalf of the farmers for what they think is a suitable product for the farmers. Um, Also aspects like maybe collecting the premium, raising awareness, potentially reporting claims. So there's a number of roles and responsibilities that distribution channels would also have to take up. Indeed, in the regulations as well, or the guidelines in Vietnam, there are some specific roles and responsibilities that the legal representatives of the farmers should take up. Yeah, or are obliged to take up if they're involved in agriculture insurance. Now, so the point being, with taking up these roles and responsibilities, obviously they would also need to have a compelling business case in order to support the implementation of agriculture insurance. So what are some of the potential business cases? There's quite a few. One is potentially the credit risk can be reduced. Yep. So in the event that the distribution channels, such as financial institutions or even agribusinesses, are giving loans or credit to the farmers, if there is the insurance cover in place, that can reduce the credit risk, because it is if the insured event takes place, then there can be the payment and the claim payment, and the claim payment would go directly from the insurance company to the distribution channels, if they were the legal representatives that the insurance policy was with. Yeah. So basically, it reduces the credit risk for the distribution channels. It can also lead to a better relationship with the farmers. It can also lead to, basically, because of more investment in farming, because the risks have been lowered, it can lead to higher productivity of the farmers. And it can also incentivize longer contracts with the farmers. So, meaning that, for example, with some of the incentive based contract farming schemes, um, insurance is being used as one of the incentives given to the farmers to continue with a certain company over many years, or to continue delivering a higher quantity of the agriculture produce to that particular company. Also, to reduce um, practices such as side selling or side marketing to other buyers. Yeah, because now that there is an additional incentive in place in the form of insurance. So those are some of the potential business cases for distribution channels. Um, Apart from that, of course, distribution channels are also very important from the product development perspective, from the pricing perspective as well. So in many cases, the distribution channels might actually influence what the final pricing is of the product, and also the final design of the product. Um, Usually a lot of feedback that one gets when designing these products and also the pricing of the products is actually from the distribution channels, who might give very useful feedback on the type of risks being covered or the level of coverage, the premium rate, the covered duration dates, whether to use an excess or deductible or not, whether certain exclusions are possible or not, and so on. So the distribution channel really has a key role to play in terms of basically negotiating with the insurance company around product development, pricing, and essentially they play a key role in the implementation of the agriculture insurance product. They can also play a role as the face of the insurance scheme, so that when the farmer, when um, yeah, so again, I think this is relating to the question of trust that came up yesterday, that if a farmer, they might hesitate to enter into a relationship, into a business contract with the insurance company, an insurance contract with the insurance company, but instead they might be quite happy to partner with the distribution channel, especially if they already have an established relationship with the distribution channel and they're already interacting with them for financing, for inputs, or for selling their crops, and so on. So those are some of the reasons why it's really important to think about engaging with different types of distribution channels. So finally, just to go through some of the different categories. Um, so in the next slide, we look at the model related to the financial institutions. So financial institutions such as banks and other financial institutions, these can distribute insurance linked to specific agricultural loan products. Yeah. So for example, let me give a quick example of this from a real scenario. There is a certain microfinance institution called Agora. In fact, they're also there in Cambodia as AMK. So Agora Microfinance, it's also there in Zambia. So in Zambia, they wanted to give specific crop loans to the farmers. So these are the single bullet repayment loans, where so the loan is given and then the entire loan capital amount is repaid at the end of the season only, when the farmers sell the crop. There's no principal repayment during the season. Yeah. So they were doing this with small scale farmers who are rainfall dependent. And then when there was a major drought, they saw that this had a big problem. This had a major impact on their credit recoveries, because now farmers were struggling to repay the principal because their crop had failed. So they were not able to repay the loan at all. So in fact, after doing this for just one season a few years ago, they stopped. They couldn't continue the product anymore, the crop loan product. But then their customers, who are rural customers, the customers were still very keen on this product, because this product was a good one for them. They didn't have to do any repayments until the end of the season, when they sell the crop and they're able to repay then, and so on. So the customers actually really wanted this, the single bullet repayment, or the crop balloon loan, as it's also known as, this particular loan product. So in that case, what this MFI did, the microfinance institution, what it did is it approached certain insurers and service providers in Zambia, and then a suitable weather index product was developed, which is now credit linked. It's bundled with the finance that is given to the farmers. So in the event that there is bad weather conditions, the claim is paid directly to the MFI, the financial institution. Then the financial institution uses that claim amount to recover whatever loans are outstanding. And then if the loans have already been repaid, then that additional amount is paid to the farmer as an additional cash payment. Yeah. So that's basically how this model works, that it's essentially it enables the financial institutions to have a more specific agricultural loans, be it crop loans or be it livestock loans, um, depending on what type of product is available. They are now able to have more specific agricultural loans. And then also it's reducing the credit risk for the banks and other financial institutions. So because it is reducing the credit risk, it's actually improving, potentially, it can improve the farmer's access to credit. Or indeed, there's another interesting possibility that it can also improve the farmers the interest rate charged. So in other words, the interest rate charged is not as high as without insurance. Without insurance, the interest rate would be higher, but because of insurance, the interest rate could potentially be lowered. That doesn't always happen from what we have seen. And indeed, one challenge of linking it to finance is that the banks or financial institutions might perceive insurance as an additional cost. So they might think that, okay, this is making our loans more expensive. We're not competitive anymore. That's also a possibility. But there is the scope of, recognizing the fact that the interest rate includes a risk loading or a risk premium related to specific risks, many of which are production risks. So to the extent that these risks have been lowered because of the insurance product, the interest rate could also be lowered potentially. So here the product is really linked with the loans which are given to the farmers. Um, and the role that in terms of the bank, one key role that they can pay, that they can play, is they can actually pre-finance the premium and add it on top of the loan. So in other words, they can actually lend the premium to the farmer, and when the farmer repays the loan, they also repay the premium. So essentially, they would then be pre-financing the premium on the farmer's behalf. Of course, there are other options as well. It's also possible potentially to have regular premium payments linked to the loan repayment, or even to a savings account and so on. So in other words, rather than the farmers paying the premium at the end of the season in just one installment, if, for example, if the loan is related to some other products like, let's say, livestock, say in the dairy sector, in that case, the farmers might have to repay the loan on a monthly basis over the course of 1 to 3 years, for example. So when they repay the loan, they can also be repaying the insurance premium in installments. Yeah, so that's an option as well regarding the premium payments. So, okay, that's in terms of the banks and other financial institutions. And then another channel I wanted to talk about briefly is linking agriculture insurance to agribusinesses. So in the next slide, we talk about this. Yes. So, okay. So basically, with the agribusinesses, those which are distributing inputs such as seeds, fertilizers, and so on, it's possible to link insurance to agribusinesses, to agriculture inputs. I think we already talked about this a little bit yesterday, but essentially, just as a quick recap, if this is done, then essentially the insurance can be used as a sales promotion tool for input companies. So it could be a way for input companies to basically have to promote more of their inputs and to use insurance as a kind of marketing tool for promoting their inputs. So interestingly, with these types of products, sometimes they don't even call it insurance in some cases. So I know for example, in some countries in Africa, these products are just referred to as germination guarantee or germination assistance in that way. So it's not even branded as insurance per se. It's just sort of, it's perceived as something to assist the farmers with the crop establishment or the crop germination in the event that there are bad weather conditions at the start of the season. Yeah. So that's basically the how this particular model can work. So in this case, the input supplier, when they are selling the inputs to the farmers would also automatically get access to insurance, or insurance could be on a optional or voluntary basis in addition to the inputs. That's also a possibility. And when the claim payouts are due, again, the insurance company can pay either the farmers directly, if that's possible. Otherwise, they could also pay the agribusiness itself, and the agribusiness can then use that claim payment for issuing vouchers or discounts to the farmers. Um, and those can be used for further purchase of inputs. So it's also a way of promoting sales for the agribusiness during the season as well. Yeah. All right. And then the last category of some potential distribution channels is in the next slide. Yep. So in the next slide, we have just a few other categories. One is contract farming. So contract farming, basically where the farmers are entering into a contract with an agribusiness, for example, to deliver a certain amount of crop at the end of the season. Maybe they're getting inputs from the company, or maybe finance from the company, or maybe they're not getting any other inputs or finance, but the company is promising to buy the crop at a pre-agreed price, for example. Contract farming operations, it's actually a good way of managing the price risk issue, which I think came up in some of the earlier discussions. Now, with contract farming operations, it's also possible to integrate agriculture insurance within contract farming operations. And again, especially if the agribusinesses are providing inputs or loans to the farmers, it can be quite, it might be possible for them to also pre-finance the premium. So this has been actually, as I was saying yesterday, this is also a very important aspect, almost as big an issue as premium subsidies, but certainly a big issue that as much as the premium is subsidized, also if the premium can be pre-financed or paid on behalf of the farmers, with the farmers having to pay the premium afterwards, maybe at the end of the season, that can actually encourage take up of these products by the farmers. It can lead to a scaling up of the product as well, because essentially otherwise it might be quite challenging to farmers to pay even a small amount at the start of the season, when they might have cash flow challenges as well, in terms of their financial situation at the start of the farming season. So the contract farming scheme, there's an option of pre-financing the premium, for example, and then collecting it from the farmers at the end of the season when the farmers are selling the crop. So in that case, when the farmers sell the crop, just like the cost of any other inputs are deducted from the crop sales, the crop of the insurance premium can also be deducted from the crop sales. Okay, so that's the contract farming model. The other point to make there is it's also quite a it can be quite a relevant model from the insurable interest perspective, which we talked about in the very first session yesterday as one of the basic concepts. So the point being that the agribusinesses will also have a direct insurable interest because they are in the business of purchasing the crop. So in other words, whereas a bank, for example, or a financial institution, they may not directly have an interest in the crop per se. They might only be concerned about recovering the loan amount. So therefore, for them to have an insurance product related to the crop might be, it might be a bit more challenging. I mean, it's still very much possible, but it might be, there might be a few questions raised also from the regulatory perspective. But with contract farming or agribusinesses, the insurable interest is more clear because they have a very direct insurable interest in the crop being insured. Also, development agencies, they can also distribute agriculture insurance as part of different types of programs, such as youth initiatives or conservation farming development programs, other types of development programs. So that's also can be quite a key distribution channel. Some of the relevant NGOs working in this sector. And of course, last but not least, certainly the farmer organizations, they can be a very key distribution channel as well. The farmer organizations would, in many cases, we see they have actually been using agriculture insurance as a form of collateral for better access to credit and also farming inputs for their members. So the farmer organizations can also be a very relevant distribution channel also in the context of Vietnam. All right, I think that's kind of brings me to an end of this morning's session. Before we open up for Q&A and comments, I see lots of comments and questions in the chat box. Maybe I would hand back to Tin to take us through the next session. Over to you, Tin.
Vâng, xin cảm ơn anh Tốt rất là nhiều. Một bài trình bày rất là dài và sáng nay chúng ta cũng có thể thấy là khi mà đi vào các cái vấn đề kỹ thuật thì bảo hiểm nói chung và bảo hiểm nông nghiệp nói riêng thì nó sẽ rất là phức tạp, không hề đơn giản. Đây là một cái thách thức rất là lớn cho các cái doanh nghiệp bảo hiểm khi mà thiết kế các sản phẩm bảo hiểm nông nghiệp. Thì như chúng tôi cũng đã đề cập thì có hai phương pháp để các anh chị có thể gửi câu hỏi đến cho diễn giả ở đây. Một là chúng ta có thể sử dụng chat box, hai là các anh chị có thể bấm cái giơ tay ở trong cái hệ thống thì chúng tôi sẽ các anh các chị có thể đặt các câu hỏi trực tiếp. Hiện nay ấy, thì chúng tôi đã nhận được tương đối nhiều các cái câu hỏi đến từ các anh chị, và để mà đảm bảo thời gian thì tôi xin phép đi vào luôn một số các cái câu hỏi. Nếu mà câu hỏi nào mà tôi có thể giải đáp được, tôi sẽ hỗ trợ anh Tốt giải đáp. Còn một đa số các câu hỏi ở đây thì tôi sẽ chuyển đến cho anh Tốt, anh sẽ nói thêm, đặc biệt là trình bày thêm với mọi người với các vấn đề liên quan mà với các gắn kết với các cái bài học quốc tế, thì để mọi người có thể nắm được thêm thông tin. Câu hỏi thứ nhất là của anh Lê Quang Hưng đến từ vụ nuôi trồng thủy sản. Anh có một câu hỏi rất là hay, đấy là trong thời gian chờ bảo hiểm cho vật nuôi có hiệu lực, tức là chờ 10 ngày hoặc là 30 ngày ấy, thì nhưng mà vật nuôi trong cái thời gian đấy chết hoặc là mất tích hoặc là do cái rủi ro nào đấy mà có những thiệt hại, thì công ty bảo hiểm có bồi hoàn tiền mua bảo hiểm hay không? Thì đây là một câu hỏi rất hay. Bởi vì sao? Bởi vì trong các cái quy định mà Bộ Tài chính phê duyệt cái sản phẩm á, thì chỉ nêu là sẽ có thời gian chờ, nhưng mà không nêu rõ ràng là nếu như mà xảy ra rủi ro trong thời gian chờ thì sẽ xử lý thế nào. Ở đây thì nó sẽ có một số các trường hợp. Thứ nhất là trong cái thời gian chờ đấy có thể là chưa ký các hợp đồng, mà chỉ ký một cái cam kết để mà sau này sẽ mua bảo hiểm, thì chắc chắn là khi đấy thì người nông dân chưa đóng tiền, thì không ai lại đi đóng tiền xong đi đòi lại khi mà cái trường hợp rủi ro đã xảy ra rồi cả. Cái thứ hai là cũng có thể là người dân đã ký hợp đồng nhưng chưa phải đóng phí, bởi vì các chị đều biết là doanh nghiệp bảo hiểm thì không yêu cầu đóng phí ngay, mà cái thời gian đóng phí là có thể trong vòng 30 ngày. Thì trong trường hợp này thì cũng chưa đóng phí, cho nên là sẽ không phát sinh cái trường hợp trả lại. Và cái ý anh hỏi ở đây là ở đây mình sẽ ký hợp đồng rồi và đóng phí rồi, nhưng mà trong thời gian chờ thì vật nuôi chết, thì cái này tôi nghĩ rằng là có thể các quy định trong các cái hợp đồng cụ thể thì các doanh nghiệp sẽ nêu rất là rõ. Và thực tế là trong trường hợp này, theo quan điểm của tôi thì chắc chắn các doanh nghiệp sẽ phải trả lại phí cho nông dân. Đấy là ý kiến của tôi về cái câu hỏi này liên quan đến Việt Nam. Cái câu hỏi thứ hai ấy, thì tôi cũng xin phép chuyển cho anh Artot, là câu hỏi của chị Đoàn Thị Bảo Ngọc đến từ Bảo hiểm Toàn cầu. Có câu hỏi là cách để đánh giá quy trình và quy định chăn nuôi như thế nào để phù hợp để người nông dân không bị áp thêm mức khấu trừ 20%, ngoài mức 30% đối với thiên tai và 40% đối với dịch bệnh. Thì xin anh Artot có thể cho ý kiến về câu hỏi này.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. No. So thanks for the questions. I mean, unfortunately, I didn't fully get the first question, but maybe I'll come back to that a little bit regarding the question on the livestock scheme. Yeah. So there is, from what we understand, there is a deduction, deductible that applies for the livestock scheme, related to the natural disasters as well as the diseases. So it's basically a deductible that applies. So I think it's about 30% for natural disasters and 40% for the diseases. I don't know if Tin, if you want to add anything else on that.
Vâng ạ, liên quan đến quy định chăn nuôi như thế nào thì thực ra ấy, thì trong các cái hợp đồng về ký giữa doanh nghiệp bảo hiểm và nông dân thì đều quy định rất là rõ về các quy định mà người nông dân phải thực hiện khi mà tham gia hợp đồng bảo hiểm. Ngoài mức 30% và 40% ấy, cái mức đấy là nghiễm nhiên, tức là nếu rủi ro xảy ra là người nông dân phải chịu. Nhưng mà cái mức khấu trừ là khi mà người nông dân làm sai các cái quy định của hợp đồng. Thì các cái quy định về chăn nuôi ở đây nó sẽ có mấy yếu tố. Cái thứ nhất là quy định về các cái điều kiện chăn nuôi. Điều kiện chăn nuôi ở đây có thể là quy mô chuồng trại này, cái độ cái tỷ lệ nuôi trên trên chuồng trại này, và cái phải xa dân cư hay là phải xa cái nguồn gây bệnh, hay là các cái quy định liên quan khác, ví dụ như liên quan đến giữ ấm, chắn gió, tức là các cái quy định về chuồng trại chăn nuôi. Cái thứ hai là các cái quy định về quy trình chăn nuôi, tức là chăn nuôi phải áp dụng theo cái quy trình nào. Thì thường thì các doanh nghiệp bảo hiểm không phải là có chuyên môn về nông nghiệp, cho nên là thường trong các hợp đồng thì các doanh nghiệp sẽ viết là phải áp dụng theo các quy trình chăn nuôi được khuyến nghị bởi các cái tổ chức chuyên môn. Và ở cấp địa phương thì thường cấp địa phương sẽ đưa ra khuyến nghị, ví dụ như là trồng lúa thì phải theo quy trình này, chăn nuôi theo hướng công nghiệp thì theo quy trình này, bán công nghiệp thì theo quy trình này, thì sẽ có hướng dẫn cụ thể. Thì ở đây nếu như không muốn bị ở đây không phải là mức khấu trừ mà mức giảm trừ, không muốn bị giảm trừ 20% thì nông dân buộc phải tuân thủ theo các cái quy định như vậy. Và nếu như mà vi phạm thì sẽ bị giảm trừ thêm 20%. Và còn một vấn đề nữa là khi mà rủi ro nó xảy ra, ví dụ như dịch bệnh thì rõ ràng là người nông dân không được phép để mặc cho cái vật nuôi đấy. Tức là họ phải chữa trị, họ phải tìm mọi cái biện pháp có thể để mà chữa trị và để mà xử lý cái rủi ro đấy. Kể cả thiên tai cũng vậy, khi mà thiên tai diễn ra thì họ phải làm theo các cái hướng dẫn của địa phương, và bất kỳ cái làm sai nào đối với các cái hướng dẫn mà đã được công bố ấy, thì đều có thể dẫn đến các khoản giảm trừ. Thì đấy là cái bổ sung của tôi trong cái câu hỏi này. Và tất nhiên rồi, nếu mà không muốn áp cái mức giảm trừ thì người nông dân phải làm theo các cái quy định hợp đồng. Thì từ hôm qua giờ mình cũng nói rất là nhiều về cái vấn đề này, tức là cái khả năng quản lý rủi ro của nông dân ấy, thì nó sẽ liên quan đến cái vấn đề này rất là nhiều. Vâng, xin cảm ơn. Câu hỏi tiếp theo, nếu các anh chị còn thắc mắc về câu hỏi thì có thể bổ sung thêm, thì chúng tôi sẽ làm rõ thêm. Tôi xin chuyển qua câu hỏi tiếp theo. Thì câu hỏi này tôi cũng xin chuyển đến anh Cô Tốt. Đấy là cũng liên quan đến cái khấu trừ. Câu hỏi của chị Thủy đến từ SIAT có đặt cái câu hỏi là với hợp đồng bảo hiểm vật nuôi đối với sự kiện bảo hiểm thiên tai thì trong hợp đồng bảo hiểm thì khi chi trả bảo hiểm, người bảo hiểm có thể áp mức khấu trừ 30% đối với thiên tai nữa không? Tức
Yeah.
là ý câu hỏi ở đây là đối với sự kiện thiên tai đã được liệt kê trong hợp đồng bảo hiểm thì người bảo hiểm có bị áp mức khấu trừ 30%. Thực ra câu hỏi này nó đang hơi sai ở chỗ nào đấy. Bởi vì mức khấu trừ là nó nghiễm nhiên ạ. Bất cứ các rủi ro thiên tai nào xảy ra mà sẽ đưa ra dịch bệnh thì đều áp mức khấu trừ. Vì mức khấu trừ này nó là nằm trong sản phẩm bảo hiểm luôn rồi. Ở đây nếu như là mức giảm trừ thì đúng hơn. Nếu mà rủi ro thiên tai xảy ra thì có áp mức giảm trừ là 20% đối với thiên tai nữa không? Và nếu như mà áp mức giảm trừ đấy thì nó sẽ như thế nào? Cái thứ hai là tương tự đối với dịch bệnh khấu trừ thì nó cũng vậy. Câu hỏi nó cũng vậy, tức là câu hỏi này tôi nghĩ là nó đang bị sai, bởi vì là mức khấu trừ nó là sản phẩm bảo hiểm và nó nghiễm nhiên là 30 hay 40% này á, là cái mà nông dân phải giữ lại, và doanh nghiệp bảo hiểm sẽ không có trách nhiệm trong cái khoản rủi ro này. Câu hỏi ở đây là còn cái câu hỏi cuối cùng của chị nêu ra thì tức là khi mà mình áp dụng mức khấu trừ 30 đến 40% đối với thiên tai dịch bệnh thì như vậy thì cái sản phẩm sẽ không còn hấp dẫn với người dân, do thực tế họ cần chi phí cho bảo hiểm cho các cái sự kiện thiên tai và dịch bệnh, nhưng mà bảo hiểm lại khấu trừ do chính các cái sự kiện thiên tai dịch bệnh đấy. Thì câu hỏi này xin chuyển đến anh Có Tốt có thể giải thích thêm ạ.
Okay. Okay, sure. If I understand correctly, basically the question is around how the disaster, how the deductible is being applied here, basically. So, okay, if based on the policy guidelines for the existing livestock insurance policy guidelines. So basically, the concept here is that there's a few things. One is that in general, there is a deductible being applied. So a deductible it basically means that when there is a claim amount. Now the claim amount is also it depends on the value that is being insured. So it could be maybe the value of the animal itself. As we know with livestock, basically when there is a claim, it means that the animal has died because of the natural disasters or the specific diseases. So in that case, basically it's 100% of the claim would need to be paid, right? 100%. But then the challenge with paying 100% is that then the claim experience would become very high. from the insurance company's perspective. So that would then make the product more expensive and so on. So this is why this concept of having a deductible comes in. So now with the deductible, essentially it's a way for farmers to retain some of the risk. So by having a deductible, the farmers are kind of sharing the risk together with the insurance companies. Yeah, so they're retaining some of the risk or sharing some of the risk with the insurance companies. So specific percentages are used. So our understanding is based on the guidelines that it's 30% for natural disasters and 40% for disease risks. So in the event that there's a claim, so in general, the payment should be 100%, but then a deductible, let's say it was because of a natural disaster, then basically the insurer is liable for 70% of the total claim amount. And so 30% is retained by the farmer, and then the 70% is paid by the insurance company. If it was diseases, then 40% would be retained by the farmer, and 60% would be paid by the insurance company. So, of course, this does erode. I agree, it does, reduce the benefit for the farmer because significant percentages not being paid. But on the other hand, this feature has been built into the livestock guidelines as a way of basically as a way for the insurers to manage their risk exposure, and then as a result being able to offer the product on a viable basis and at relatively low premium rates. Yeah, that's the rationale for the deductible. The other aspect of the additional deductible of the 20% that was talked about, that's basically an additional that's more of a penalty in the event that the farmers did not comply with good farming practices, they did not report the loss properly, and so on. So that's more of an additional penalty. But this aspect of the 30 to 40%, it's not a penalty per se. It's more of a feature that the farmers will have to share the risk together with the insurance companies as a way of keeping the cost to a manageable level as well. I don't know if that helps with the questions. Yeah.
Vâng, xin cảm ơn anh Albertos. Thực ra là ở đây có hai ý thôi. Về cái vấn đề hấp dẫn của sản phẩm đối với người nông dân thì nó có hai cái khía cạnh. Cái thứ nhất là cái độ phủ của cái rủi ro, và cái thứ hai là cái giá của cái sản phẩm đấy. Thì ở đây thì cái mức khấu trừ này là cái sự đánh đổi thôi. Cái đánh đổi thôi. Nếu như mà mình công ty bảo hiểm hoàn toàn có thể bảo hiểm 100%, nhưng mà nếu như thế thì giá nó sẽ tăng vọt lên và có thể người nông dân nó vượt quá khả năng chi trả của người nông dân. Cái thứ hai nữa, như anh Albertos đã trình bày thì cái này là vấn đề một cái kỹ thuật để mà mình hạn chế được các cái rủi ro liên quan đến đạo đức nữa. Bởi vì khi mà rủi ro nó xảy ra và người nông dân được bồi thường hoàn toàn 100% thì họ sẽ rất dễ buông cái sản phẩm của họ. Ở đây mình phải đảm bảo rằng là khi rủi ro xảy ra thì chắc chắn là nông dân phải có thiệt hại. Thì khi mà có thiệt hại thì họ mới tiến hành các cái hoạt động để mà bảo vệ cái tài sản của họ. Thì đây là một cái kỹ thuật mà các công ty sản phẩm bảo hiểm thường áp dụng để mà nâng cao cái trách nhiệm của người nông dân trong việc thực hiện cái hợp đồng bảo hiểm của mình. Đấy là hai ý mà anh Albertos trình bày, để tôi xin phép làm rõ thêm thôi. Nếu như mà có chỗ nào chưa rõ thì xin mời chị Thủy có thể giơ tay và nói rõ thêm thì chúng tôi sẽ giải thích thêm ạ. Tôi xin phép chuyển qua cái câu hỏi tiếp theo. Câu hỏi từ anh Lê Quang Hưng từ vụ nuôi trồng thủy sản. Thì cũng có một câu hỏi liên quan đến thủy sản. Bởi vì anh không thấy là trong sản phẩm nuôi trồng thủy sản thì có cái thời gian chờ giống như vật nuôi. Câu hỏi của anh là trong nuôi trồng thủy sản thì có thời gian chờ để mà có hiệu lực giống như vật nuôi hay không. Thì câu này thì tôi xin phép hỗ trợ anh Albertos trả lời luôn, bởi vì các quy định bây giờ chủ yếu là tiếng Việt. Thì trong cái sản phẩm mà được Bộ Tài chính phê duyệt hiện nay ấy, thì sản phẩm nuôi trồng thủy sản sẽ không có thời gian chờ. Cái hiệu lực của sản phẩm bảo hiểm sẽ tính từ 0 giờ ngày nuôi đầu tiên cho đến 24 giờ ngày nuôi cuối cùng. Và ở đây là ngày nuôi 120 của tôm sú và ngày nuôi thứ 80 của tôm thẻ chân trắng, thì nó sẽ không có thời gian chờ. Cái thứ hai nữa là bởi vì hiện nay ấy, thì sản phẩm nuôi trồng thủy sản thì không bảo hiểm cho các cái dịch bệnh, mà thường thì thời gian chờ là chủ yếu để mà phòng chống dịch bệnh, cho nên là chắc chắn là sản phẩm bảo hiểm thủy sản thì bây giờ không có thời gian chờ. Vâng. Còn câu hỏi tiếp theo cũng liên quan đến sản phẩm nuôi trồng thủy sản, đấy là vấn đề về câu hỏi từ anh Sơn đến từ trung tâm thông tin. Thì có một câu hỏi liên quan đến vấn đề trục lợi từ bảo hiểm thủy sản. Thì anh ấy cho rằng ok, xin mời anh Tốt có ý kiến.
Okay, no, I was just wanting to add to what you said on the waiting time. That no, exactly, I fully agree with what you said. Basically, I think the main reason for that, for not having the waiting time for fisheries, is that basically the waiting time is a way of controlling for anti-selection. So with farmers, with in the context of livestock, for example, if farmers are already aware that because some diseases are covered for livestock as well, so that becomes more relevant, because if the farmers are aware that the animal already has some disease, then they take out insurance because of that, or the animal is quite ill and then they take out insurance. But as you mentioned correctly, Tin, with aquaculture, currently it's only natural disasters. There are no diseases insured. So this is the reason why this and the natural disasters are not in the control of anyone. So as a result, the waiting time is not required there. I would just add that maybe one way in which the waiting, not exactly the waiting time, but a similar effect to the waiting time is sort of there in the aquaculture product, in the sense that basically with the compensation or the claim amount that can be paid out, it takes into account the stage at which the stage of the production cycle. So there's a formula that's used to determine the compensation, and with that formula, basically, if the so early on in the production cycle, the claim amount would be much lower. If the loss happens later on in the production cycle, the claim amount is much higher. Yeah, so that sort of takes into account a little bit the risk of claims occurring early on in the production cycle. Thank you.
Xin cảm ơn anh Tốt. Anh Tốt đã làm rõ hơn cái vấn đề này trong cái phạm vi các cái khái niệm liên quan đến bảo hiểm. Xin cảm ơn anh rất là nhiều. Tôi xin chuyển sang cái câu hỏi tiếp theo, đấy là câu hỏi của anh Sơn đến từ trung tâm thông tin. Thì anh ấy có thắc mắc trong vấn đề trục lợi từ bảo hiểm thủy sản. Bởi vì anh ấy cho rằng là cái trục lợi từ bảo hiểm thủy sản thì nó rất là dễ để diễn ra. Thì đặc biệt là trong vấn đề kiểm đếm cái giá trị thủy sản bị thiệt hại để mà đưa ra cái tỷ lệ bồi thường thì cũng rất là khó khăn. Thì từ đấy dẫn đến là cái việc nuôi trồng ngành thủy sản rất là khó triển khai cái hoạt động bảo hiểm nông nghiệp và gây ra những cái hạn chế. Mặc dù là người dân và doanh nghiệp thì đều mong muốn tham gia cái loại hình bảo hiểm này, thì anh ấy có câu hỏi là mình có giải pháp nào để mà khắc phục các cái hạn chế liên quan đến trục lợi bảo hiểm từ bảo hiểm thủy sản, và một số các cái kinh nghiệm quốc tế để mà giải quyết cái vấn đề trục lợi từ sản phẩm bảo hiểm thủy sản, đặc biệt trong vấn đề là xác định cái rủi ro và kiểm đếm các cái thiệt hại để làm cơ sở tính toán bồi thường cho người dân. Thì câu hỏi này xin anh Cao Tốt có thể trả lời ạ.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So so regarding the rent-seeking behavior for aquaculture, yeah, it is quite difficult, really, in the context of. I mean, as with other types of agriculture insurance as well, I think generally with the rent-seeking behavior, there's a few ways in which it could be potentially managed. One is by, um, uh, well, in addition to the product being available on a voluntary basis, if it can also be bundled with other services such as loans or farming inputs, because in that case, there's also a certain amount of due diligence, which let's say the financial institution or the agribusiness would be carrying out of the farmers before they are working with them. So if the insurance can also be bundled with those services um, and potentially done also on a mandatory basis, but even if it's on a voluntary basis, if there is that bundling with those other underlying services, that could be one way of addressing that. But apart from that, I think well, it also depends on the design of the product, because I think with certain types of risks, for example, certain types of in aquaculture with the disease risk in aquaculture, it can lead to I believe it also led to a lot of claims for the aquaculture product in the past, which made it very difficult to continue the disease cover. But then the natural disaster cover might be more manageable. And I mean, of course, the natural disasters can't be, it's not in the control of the farmers. So it's to that extent, it would be easier to sort of verify the events and to basically verify the natural disasters which are causing the damage. So I think those are a couple of examples of how the rent-seeking behavior can be dealt with potentially. Also, of course, with the events themselves, which are causing. Okay, the other aspect is the good farming practices, because, for example, for farmers to be eligible for the aquaculture insurance. So in some other countries as well, there is a prerequisite on following very good risk control measures, such as rules for the standards to do with the diseases, or in terms of so in terms of the correct standards on aquaculture, they need to be followed. There should also be standards followed on the reporting that they do. So for example, the reporting they do related to identifying the ponds, or the density of the shrimp stock density, the biomass, and so on. So this kind of recording also needs to be done on a as per the best practices. So I think those are some potential ways in which to manage this risk for aquaculture.
Vâng, xin cảm ơn anh Cao Tốt rất là nhiều. Ở đây thì có ý kiến của anh Bùi Ngọc Thắng đến từ công ty Bảo Việt, thì cũng đồng quan điểm với lại anh Cao Tốt, đấy là để mà hạn chế cái vấn đề này thì mình sẽ phải sản xuất và đi vào thực hành sản xuất nông nghiệp tốt, sản xuất nuôi trồng thủy sản tốt bằng cách áp dụng khoa học kỹ thuật chặt chẽ theo các cái quy trình, các cái tiêu chuẩn quốc tế để phục vụ cho xuất khẩu, và quan trọng là có quy mô lớn, quy mô tập trung để mà áp dụng các cái tiêu chuẩn đấy. Thì đấy là cái ý kiến bổ sung từ anh Ngọc, anh Thắng ở công ty Bảo Việt. Thì liên quan đến cái câu hỏi của anh Sơn ấy, thì tôi cũng có 2 điểm này thôi. Cái thứ nhất ấy, là ở đây nó có hai vấn đề trong việc xác định cái bồi thường. Là cái thứ nhất là cái kiểm đếm, tức là tỷ lệ chết trong cái ao đấy là bao nhiêu. Thì nếu như là kiểm đếm thì cái kỹ thuật kiểm đếm thì tôi nghĩ là nó cũng không khó, chỉ quan trọng là thời gian và quan trọng là con người thôi. Thì cái trục lợi là do con người, thì mình có thể xem xét lại các cái doanh nghiệp bảo hiểm có thể xem xét lại các cái quy trình để mà làm sao đấy các cái quy trình đấy nó rất là minh bạch, nhanh chóng và chặt chẽ. Thì cái đấy là mình có thể giải quyết được cái vấn đề kiểm đếm. Cái khó khăn nhất của công ty bảo hiểm nó không phải là kiểm đếm, mà nó là xác định cái nguyên nhân thiệt hại. Tức là trong trường hợp dịch bệnh ấy, thì cái nguyên nhân, cái dịch bệnh đấy là dịch bệnh gì để dẫn đến thiệt hại trong thủy sản. Thì cái đấy là cái khó. Bởi vì hiện nay như hôm qua tôi có bảo rồi, các cái hệ thống phòng thí nghiệm của mình để mà có thể kiểm tra ra cái bệnh đấy là bệnh gì ấy, nó rất là thiếu, và nó rất là ở xa các cái khu vực sản xuất, cho nên là rất là khó. Cái thứ hai là hôm qua tôi cũng có đề cập rồi, bởi vì tôm để ngày thứ hai là thành phân bón, nên mình không thể kiểm đếm được nữa, và cái đấy mình sẽ phải xác nhận trong một cái thời gian sớm nhất có thể chỉ trong 2-3 tiếng đầu thôi. Bởi vì các anh chị đều hiểu con tôm là để 3-4 tiếng ngoài trời là nó sẽ hư hỏng, hư hại rất là nhanh. Thì cái đấy mới là cái vấn đề của bảo hiểm thủy sản. Và cái vấn đề đấy bây giờ được xử lý bằng cách nào? Bằng cách là các doanh nghiệp bảo hiểm sẽ không bảo hiểm cái dịch bệnh trong nuôi trồng thủy sản, đặc biệt trong con tôm nữa, mà chỉ bảo hiểm cho thiên tai. Thì bởi vì rủi ro về dịch bệnh trong tôm nó quá cao, cho nên là dẫn đến các cái trục lợi. Đấy là cái cách mà doanh nghiệp đang xử lý bây giờ, tức là loại bỏ cái rủi ro đấy ra khỏi cái sản phẩm bảo hiểm luôn. Nhưng mà nó sẽ phát sinh ra rất là nhiều vấn đề, mà có thể là chiều nay tôi sẽ nói sâu hơn về cái này ở phần chính sách. Nhưng mà nó sẽ phát sinh ra vấn đề là rất là khó triển khai một cái sản phẩm bảo hiểm như vậy trên thực tế. Thì đấy là cái ý kiến của tôi liên quan đến câu hỏi của anh Sơn. Và thực ra thì cái câu hỏi này nó cũng đã trả lời cho cái câu hỏi của anh Hưng. Cái câu hỏi thứ hai của anh Hưng về phía sau đấy là cái khủng hoảng niềm tin về vấn đề bồi thường phát sinh ấy, thì và quy trình thẩm định kéo dài thiệt hại, thì cái vấn đề cái câu hỏi này cũng đã được trả lời ở phần này luôn. Thực ra tôi muốn thêm một cái ý nữa thôi. Trong cái sản phẩm bảo hiểm mà trước đây chúng ta thí điểm ở giai đoạn 2011 đến 2014 ấy, thì cái khủng hoảng niềm tin của người nông dân ấy, nó chắc chỉ bằng 1/10 so với khủng hoảng niềm tin của các doanh nghiệp bảo hiểm thôi. Bởi vì cái thời gian đấy các cái doanh nghiệp bảo hiểm mới là cái tác nhân mà khủng hoảng rất là lớn, bởi vì cái thiệt hại trong nuôi trồng thủy sản nó quá lớn. Và tôi nhớ không nhầm thì cái tỷ lệ bồi thường trên phí bảo hiểm trong thủy sản nó khoảng 300%, 270%. Tức là anh thu 1 đồng phí bảo hiểm thì anh phải chi bồi thường lên đến 2,76 đồng. Cho nên là các doanh nghiệp bồi thường, doanh nghiệp bảo hiểm mới là doanh nghiệp mà khủng hoảng nhiều hơn nông dân nhiều trong cái thời gian đấy. Và bây giờ cái giải pháp đưa ra thì như tôi đã nói là người ta sẽ loại bỏ một số các cái rủi ro ra khỏi cái sản phẩm bảo hiểm. Thì cái này nó cũng có cái tính kết nối với lại cái câu hỏi phía sau của anh Lê Quang Hưng đến từ vụ nuôi trồng thủy sản, là hiện nay thì Việt Nam đang bảo hiểm nuôi trồng thủy sản như thế nào. Thì các anh các chị đều biết là cái ngành nuôi trồng thủy sản là một cái ngành cực kỳ tiềm năng cho bảo hiểm, cho công ty bảo hiểm, bởi vì cái giá trị nó rất là lớn. Cái nhu cầu bảo hiểm của các cái doanh nghiệp bảo hiểm của người nông dân rất là lớn và họ có khả năng chi trả rất là cao cho cái sản phẩm đấy. Tuy nhiên cái rủi ro nó cũng rất là cao, thành ra là các cái doanh nghiệp cũng rất là băn khoăn trong cái việc áp dụng sản phẩm bảo hiểm nuôi trồng thủy sản. Thực ra là trong cái thời gian thí điểm và trong cái thời gian khởi đầu của bảo hiểm, giống như mà cái thời gian này của Việt Nam á, thì kinh nghiệm từ các quốc gia trên thế giới là họ sẽ không bắt đầu chương trình bảo hiểm bằng bảo hiểm thủy sản, bởi vì nó quá rủi ro. Và thường thì sau khoảng 10-20 năm, thậm chí 30 năm thì họ mới bắt đầu quay trở lại để đầu tư vào cho ngành thủy sản. Bởi vì khi đấy cái kinh nghiệm trong cái vấn đề thủy sản nông nghiệp nói chung họ đã có rồi. Còn hiện nay thì bảo hiểm như thế nào á? Thì hiện nay thì chúng ta có, Bộ Tài chính có phê duyệt cái sản phẩm bảo hiểm như là anh Ao Tốt đã trình bày. Còn trên thực tế, trên thực địa thì hôm qua chị Hoa ở Cục Kinh tế Hợp tác cũng đã trình bày với mình một cái ý rất là hay. Đấy là khi mà triển khai trên thực địa thì thứ nhất là người nuôi trồng thủy sản thì không có hộ nghèo, cho nên là cái tỷ lệ hỗ trợ phí nó rất là thấp. Cái thứ hai là cái nhu cầu bảo hiểm các cái rủi ro bảo hiểm của người nông dân trong nuôi trồng thủy sản nó là dịch bệnh chứ không phải thiên tai. Bởi vì là trong trong một cái danh sách thiên tai mà trong quyết định 22 và trong các sản phẩm nông nghiệp nêu lên đấy, thì chỉ có một vài cái đấy thường xuyên xuất hiện ở đồng bằng sông Cửu Long thôi. 5 tỉnh chúng ta đang phê duyệt là 5 tỉnh đồng bằng sông Cửu Long, và đồng bằng sông Cửu Long rất là hiếm khi mà có rủi ro về mặt thiên tai lớn như bão, lũ. Bão thì có thể 10 năm mới xảy ra một lần. Cho nên là cái nhu cầu của người dân thì nó là bảo hiểm về thiệt hại về dịch bệnh chứ không phải thiên tai. Thành ra là tôi có hình dung là bây giờ thực ra là các cái doanh nghiệp bảo hiểm đã xuống các thực địa. Tôi có đi thực địa và cũng có hỏi nông dân thì họ cũng bảo là các doanh nghiệp đã xuống cũng trình bày, nhưng mà rõ ràng là cái đấy nó không phù hợp với họ, và một số địa phương thì không thể triển khai được cái sản phẩm bảo hiểm này. Thì có thể kết luận một chút ở đây là hiện nay cái tình trạng chung của cái bảo hiểm thủy sản là cái bên bán và bên mua chưa gặp được nhau ở cái rủi ro, quan trọng nhất là ở cái rủi ro về mặt bảo hiểm, rủi ro mà được bảo hiểm đấy. Thì anh Hưng, đấy là một số các vấn đề liên quan đến bảo hiểm thủy sản ở Việt Nam. Anh Hưng cũng hỏi thêm về bài học kinh nghiệm quốc tế có thể áp dụng Việt Nam và đánh giá như thế nào về tiềm năng của người dân, thì em đánh giá rồi. Thì bài học quốc tế thì anh Ao Tốt cũng trình bày nhiều rồi. Thì nếu mà anh Ao Tốt có bổ sung thêm cho câu hỏi này thì xin mời anh ạ. Câu hỏi là tôi xin nhắc lại câu hỏi là bảo hiểm nuôi trồng thủy sản nông nghiệp thủy sản ở Việt Nam đang như thế nào, và bài học quốc tế có thể áp dụng ở Việt Nam đối với lĩnh vực nuôi trồng thủy sản. Cảm ơn ạ.
Yes, yes. Okay. Yeah. So, well, basically with the aquaculture, yeah, it's very challenging, really. But yeah, there has been quite a lot of history of aquaculture insurance that's gone on for some time. For example, in Europe, of course, there's been quite a bit of aquaculture from the 1970s or so. In Asia as well, there's aquaculture products have been going on. And now, as I yesterday talked about some of the key risks which are insured. Generally, from the insurance perspective, we could say that well, in the, let's say, some time ago in the 1980s, 90s and so on, the overall I did some research on this some time ago, and overall it seems like the experience was quite bad, was worse in the past. Then in more recent decades, I think the experience has become somewhat better, but still it's in general, it's kind of it's only marginally profitable in even in like Europe and North America. It's not very profitable. It's yeah, but in terms of the value being insured, so in many cases the value insured is actually linked to the cost of production rather than the sales price. But that's also quite typical for a lot of livestock categories. Then you have you have independent loss assessors for doing loss assessments in some countries in Europe and also in China, in Chile, and so on. But the insurance policy document should actually provide the specific guidelines on how the loss reporting and the loss assessment should be done. Generally speaking, the claims have been quite high, overall. And there's also been a shortage of specialist skills on aquaculture insurance underwriting, for example, or insurance risk assessment. But yeah, so it is certainly a very challenging area overall. In maybe some specifics I could share. So I mean, in terms of the claims ratios, so for example, in China, aquaculture has been I think this is going back a few years now. In 2003, the loss ratio was highest compared to all the listed insurance groups. So it had a very high claims ratio basically in China. But then in more recent years, they've still been quite high. So one of the claims ratios I came across was from Shanghai Axin, where it was between 80 to 90% claims ratio in recent years. So that's still very high because, okay, it's less than 100%, but then once you take expenses into account, then it can be loss making most probably for the insurance company. So it is definitely quite a challenging sector overall. But I mean, there's a few, I guess, general recommendations or things which could be done. One is maybe focusing on specific risks. So one aspect which came to mind is, for example, with the natural disasters, maybe maybe it's not needed to have all the different natural disasters in scope. Maybe the focus can just be on some specific natural disasters which are most relevant, and maybe these can also vary by the type, the region, and the risk exposure and in that particular region. And then there is scope of using satellite data, for example, or satellite technology for monitoring of these natural disasters. But apart from natural disasters, as the earlier comments from Tin, yeah, of course, diseases are still relevant. So maybe one option could be to have a kind of a compromise that not covering all diseases, but covering some specific diseases which can be monitored more easily. That could be an option of having, some selected diseases which are covered, which are easier to monitor. But then in general, the good risk management practices are really very important for aquaculture. So things like appropriate feeding, maintaining appropriate water tank levels, so on. So yeah, so I think those are just some ideas related to aquaculture. But generally, it is a very challenging sector, a very challenging category of agriculture insurance. Yeah.
Vâng, xin cảm ơn anh Cao Tốt. Ở đây nó có thể có thêm một cái ý nữa là về cái tiềm năng, về khả năng sự tham gia của người dân trong nuôi trồng thủy sản, trong bảo hiểm nuôi trồng thủy sản. Thực ra là tôi phát hiện ra là nếu như, bởi vì cái này, cái áp dụng thủy sản hay không nó tùy thuộc vào cái khả năng mình có quản lý được cái rủi ro xảy ra hay không. Cho nên là nó sẽ rất rủi ro nếu như mà bảo thủy sản đối với thực trạng hiện nay, nếu rất rủi ro nếu như mà mình bảo hiểm cho cái nhóm người dân nhỏ lẻ bên ngoài theo quảng canh hay là theo bán thâm canh ấy, thì rất là khó. Mà có một cái thị trường mà mình có thể xem xét, đấy là các cái khu vực mà họ áp áp dụng công nghệ cao ấy, trong nuôi tôm hoặc là nuôi cá tra thì áp dụng công nghệ cao rất là nhiều, đặc biệt là cá tra mà trong các cái vùng nguyên liệu của doanh nghiệp xuất khẩu cá tra ấy, thì những cái khu vực như vậy thì họ kiểm soát rủi ro rất là tốt. Do vậy tôi nghĩ là cái khu vực này mình có thể là thí điểm được các cái loại hình bảo hiểm nuôi trồng thủy sản để xem xét và mở rộng. Thì cái giai đoạn mở rộng mình sẽ phải đánh giá ban đầu rất là nhiều. Khi nào mà nó các cái yếu tố, các cái điều kiện nó hội đủ thì cái bảo hiểm nuôi trồng thủy sản nó mới thích hợp. Ở đây thì anh Sơn ở trung tâm thông tin cũng bổ sung một chút, đấy là anh đồng ý với quan điểm là hiện nay bảo hiểm nuôi trồng thủy sản thì nó có cầu nhưng không có cung, có cung nhưng không có cầu. Thì thực ra là đồng ý với quan điểm là cái cung cầu nó đang bị sai lệch với nhau và không gặp được nhau đấy. Đấy là một số các câu hỏi, thì không biết là có anh chị nào có thêm câu hỏi hoặc là có cái vấn đề gì đấy cần phải giải đáp thêm không ạ? Thì đề nghị các anh chị có thể phát biểu thì chúng tôi sẽ giải đáp thêm ạ. Vâng, xin mời anh. Vâng, mời anh.
Vâng, không biết là xin hỏi ban tổ chức, không biết là hiện tại bây giờ thì liên quan đến bảo hiểm cho vật nuôi đấy, thì hiện tại Việt Nam bây giờ có bao nhiêu công ty làm bảo hiểm cho đối tượng vật nuôi, và số lượng người chăn nuôi đấy tham gia được bảo hiểm, rồi số lượng được thanh toán bảo hiểm là xin hết ạ.
Xin cảm ơn câu hỏi của anh Hùng. Liên quan đến câu hỏi này thì thực ra là nếu mà các cái số liệu trước cái giai đoạn trước thì bọn em có và có thể chia sẻ với anh, đặc biệt là trong cái giai đoạn thí điểm. Còn như anh biết thì hiện nay thì ví dụ như là các cái sản phẩm bảo hiểm được phê duyệt mà được trình bày trong cái buổi hôm nay thì nó mới được phê duyệt năm 2019, tức là được triển khai phê duyệt năm 2020, giữa năm 2020, tức là đến nay thì nó được khoảng 1 năm. Thì trong đấy có các cái thay đổi về quy định nữa, thành ra là nó gặp rất là nhiều khúc mắc. Hiện nay thì có Bảo Việt là được phê, Bảo Duyệt, Bảo Minh được phê duyệt, và trong đấy bọn tôi biết nữa là có công ty bảo hiểm ngân hàng nông nghiệp cũng đang thí điểm ở Lâm Đồng cho sản phẩm bò sữa, thì anh có thể tham khảo thêm. Còn về số liệu của những cái này thì chắc là phải để một thời gian thì chúng tôi cũng có điều kiện, có đến một cái mức nhất định nào đấy thì chúng tôi sẽ làm việc lại với các cái doanh nghiệp, các cái bên liên quan, đặc biệt là Bộ Tài chính, để xin các cái số liệu, vì các cái số liệu này thì chưa được tổng hợp và chưa được công bố, cho nên là chúng tôi cũng xin phép. Còn nếu các cái số liệu mà giai đoạn trước thì chúng tôi hoàn toàn có thể chia sẻ các cái số liệu đấy. Tức là anh có thể tham khảo công ty bảo hiểm nông nghiệp, Bảo Việt, Bảo Minh. Thì 3 cái doanh nghiệp đấy có thể đang tham gia vào cái bảo hiểm vật nuôi hiện nay. Ở Vĩnh Phúc, ở Lâm Đồng, ở Hà Giang. Đấy, thì một số các cái địa phương đấy. Vâng, xin phép có ai có câu hỏi gì thêm không ạ? Nếu không ai có câu hỏi hay ý kiến gì thêm thì tôi xin phép sẽ chuẩn bị kết thúc cái buổi sáng hôm nay ở đây. Thì xin cảm ơn anh đã tốt rất là nhiều. Trong cái phần chiều nay thì chúng ta sẽ quay lại với các cái quy định về chính sách. Thì đây là một phần mà rất được nhiều người quan tâm. Thì trong 2 ngày vừa qua chúng ta cũng thảo luận rất là nhiều rồi. Thì tôi sẽ cố gắng trình bày một cách cơ bản nhất để các anh các chị nắm được các cái luồng chảy của cái chính sách của mình. Cái thứ hai là liên quan đến nông dân, thì tức là xem là bây giờ người nông dân người ta đang thắc mắc những cái vấn đề gì về bảo hiểm nông nghiệp, cũng như là các cái chiến lược đào tạo bảo hiểm nông nghiệp. Đặc biệt là chiều hôm nay thì sẽ có một phần trình bày giới thiệu về cái dự án Insure, một cái dự án đang hỗ trợ cho Việt Nam và một số các quốc gia để phát triển đào tạo cũng như là tăng cường năng lực, cũng như là một số các cái hoạt động phát triển thị trường bảo hiểm nông nghiệp. Thì trong cái phần đấy thì chị Emily cũng có thể đặt ra một số các cái câu hỏi, và nếu như các cái doanh nghiệp, các cái cơ quan nghiên cứu cũng như là các cái cơ quan quản lý ở đây mà có các cái yêu cầu gì đối với các cái hỗ trợ từ dự án, thì mình hoàn toàn có thể đề xuất với dự án, thì họ sẽ xem xét và sau đấy sẽ có thể sẽ xem xét và hỗ trợ cho các anh các chị được. Cái dự án này thì là hợp tác của nhiều bên, của IFAD, của SIDA và nhiều bên nữa. Thì đấy là một cái phần rất hay, thì đề nghị các anh các chị có thể chuẩn bị các cái yêu cầu của mình và có thể trình bày đến với dự án. Thì sau cái phần chị em mình sẽ kết luận. Vâng, thì tôi xin phép kết thúc buổi sáng ở đây và xin gặp lại các anh các chị vào lúc 13:30 chiều ạ. Vâng. Và chúc các anh các chị có một buổi trưa ngon miệng, và cảm ơn anh Auto rất là nhiều. Cảm ơn anh. Hẹn gặp lại anh.
Thanks.
Cần các số liệu giai đoạn trước khá đẹp.